giant moth hissed with pain and fury, clearly having been completely taken aback by the result of that clash. However, a vicious light then flashed through its golden eyes, and a layer of green light surfaced over its mangled arms. The wounds on its arms began to rapidly heal as a result, and it abruptly flapped its wings again to release a vast expanse of scintillating white light. The wings then disappeared in a flash, transforming into hundreds of shimmering flying blades, each of which was around half a foot in length. A ferocious light flashed through the monster's eyes, and the flying blades behind it began to emit a buzzing sound, seemingly as if they were about to fly toward Han Li. However, right at this moment, Han Li suddenly smiled as golden light flashed from his body. The golden scales and 4 golden arms that he'd conjured up suddenly blurred before disappearing, and the giant moth was rather taken aback by this development. All of a sudden, Han Li made a hand seal, and a loud thunderclap rang out from behind him as a pair of shimmering wings appeared on his back. With nothing more than a gentle flap of those wings, Han Li instantly disappeared on the spot. In the next instant, another thunderclap rang out several hundred feet away, and Han Li re-emerged out of thin air. However, he didn't unleash any cultivation arts or treasures. Instead, he merely crossed his arms and appraised the giant moth with a hint of a smile on his face. The massive moth was quite bewildered by this, but its ferocious nature instantly vanquished the doubts in its mind. It let loose a loud hiss as all of the scales on its body instantly stood up on end before it attempted to fly toward Han Li. However, Han Li suddenly chuckled as he rubbed his hands together before uttering the words, "Fall, fall, fall." As soon as those words were uttered by Han Li, the giant moth suddenly felt a rush of dizziness, following which it began to experience an unbearable itch on its chest. A section of its body also instantly lost all feeling, and its massive body began to sway in an unsteady manner. The monster was naturally both infuriated and alarmed, and it hurriedly looked down to discover that the tiny puncture wound on its chest still hadn't healed. Not only that, but a small section of its body had turned a dark purple color with that puncture wound at the center of that area, and a putrid smell was emanating from that section. That was also the same section of its body that it had lost all feeling in. It appeared to have been afflicted by some kind of lethal poison. This poison was extremely potent yet discreet, and it had completely failed to notice it until now. The giant moth was stunned by this drastic turn of events. It immediately opened its mouth to expel a burst of green light, within which a green egg-sized bead was faintly visible. The burst of light then disappeared into the wound on its chest in a flash while the bead revolved in midair just in front of the wound. At the same time, the bead began to release a peculiar fragrant aroma that immediately nullified the putrid odor emanating from the poisoned wound, and the dark purple poisoned section of its body instantly ceased spreading. Han Li was rather surprised to see this. He had witnessed just how potent the poison of the revolving evil spirit light was in person, and the fact that the giant moth wasn't immediately killed by the poison indicated that its body was quite resistant to toxins. However, Han Li merely chuckled coldly upon seeing this, and brilliant azure light erupted from his body as he transformed into a massive azure bird over 100 feet in size. He then flapped his wings and hurtled toward the giant moth, sweeping up gusts of fierce azure winds in his wake. At the same time, a loud thunderclap rang out, and thick bolts of golden lightning instantly surfaced over the massive bird's body. The lightning turned the bird's huge talons into a golden color before they grabbed toward the giant moth with ferocious might. The monstrous moth down below hurriedly sent the flying blades behind it hurtling toward Han Li, but the massive azure bird merely continued to fly on ahead, completely ignoring the oncoming blades as it maintained its astonishing speed. The flying blades quickly struck the giant bird, only to be swatted aside by its massive wings amid a string of loud clangs, rendering them completely ineffective. This was not a surprising occurrence. After all, Han Li's physical body was already powerful to the extreme, and after undergoing his cunning transformation, it was enhanced even further, so there was naturally no way that these blades would be able to harm him. In contrast, his sharp talons swept through the air like lightning and managed to tear through the monstrous moth's body with ease. The moth's body was completely dismembered by Han Li's attack, but it was only an empty husk without flesh or blood within it. The true body of the moth had disappeared, leaving only a ragged chrysalis in its place. Even the green bead that it was using to eradicate the poison within its body was merely a projection, and it also vanished in a flash. Han Li faltered slightly upon seeing this before blue light flashed through his massive eyes. He then flapped his wings violently a few times, and the golden arcs of lightning surging all over his body shot forth amid a string of explosive thunderclaps. Arcs of golden lightning instantly appeared in a radius of several thousand feet, covering vast distances in the blink of an eye. A resounding boom rang out as golden lightning exploded around 500 feet away from Han Li, transforming in countless thin arcs of lightning that flashed in an erratic manner. These thin arcs of lightning then formed a massive golden net that was sent swooping down from above, but a streak of green light suddenly flashed from down below before piercing through the golden lightning net. The giant moth stumbled out of the golden lightning, and at this point, around two-thirds of its body had turned into a dark purple color. It was holding that green bead in its mouth to keep the poison from spreading toward its head, and its arms and tail also seemed to be resistant to the poison to a certain degree. Even so, it was quite clear that it was in a very sorry state and could barely even keep itself aloft. It was no wonder that it had immediately attempted to flee the scene and didn't dare to engage Han Li in battle any longer. Unfortunately, despite its discreet concealment techniques, it was still unable to escape the detection of Han Li's bright-side spirit eyes. In order to withstand the divine Devilbane lightning, it had no choice but to muster up some of its magic power, but as a result, there was insufficient magic power dedicated to repressing the poison within its body, and the toxin spread at an alarming rate. Han Li flapped his wings and flew over to the giant moth in a flash, before looking down at it from above with a cold look in his eyes. Even though the giant bird that Han Li had transformed into wasn't actually a cunning true spirit, he had absorbed its true spirit blood, so the aura emanating from his body bore a strong resemblance to that of a true cunning. A hint of fear finally flashed through the golden eyes of the monstrous moth upon seeing this, and gray light emanated from its body as it attempted to unleash some kind of movement technique in order to flee the scene. However, in the next instant, a crisp crack suddenly sounded as the green bead that it was holding in its mouth abruptly shattered. Both Han Li and the giant moth were quite taken aback by this unexpected development. However, the monstrous moth then let loose a shrill screech, and piercing light erupted from its body as it swelled drastically to several times its original size. Gray light then flashed beside its huge serpentine head, and its other feline head also appeared. Both of its heads wore deranged expressions as it pounced toward Han Li with ferocious might, and it swung both of its arms violently through the air, conjuring up a pair of gargantuan claw projections. The world's origin chi within a radius of several kilometers formed countless specks of light before being absorbed by the two giant claw projections, and they swelled drastically to encompass heaven and earth before slowly traveling toward Han Li. In the face of the colossal claw projections, Han Li was struck by the sense that there was no way for him to evade this attack, and his pupils contracted drastically. He let loose a clearly cry, and azure light revolved around his body as he instantly transformed into a peacock that was enveloped in 5-colored spiritual light. The peacock was only around 10 feet in size, but the 5-colored light swirling around its body seemed to possess some kind of mystical defensive properties. Han Li had activated his 12 awakening transformations to adopt this 5-colored peacock form. For some reason, he had instinctively undergone this transformation in the face of the oncoming claw projections. As a result, an astonishing turn of events unfolded. Just as the claw projections were about to reach Han Li, the feathers from the 5-colored peacock's body suddenly shot forth before fusing into the 5-colored light around it. The 5-colored spiritual light instantly swelled to several tens of times its original size, then swept directly toward the giant claw projection. From a distance, it appeared as if a 5-colored waterfall of light was descending from above. A hint of incredulity flashed through the massive moth's eyes at the sight of the 5-colored peacock and the 5-colored spiritual light. The giant claw projections and the 5-colored waterfall of light clashed, yet the collision was completely silent and anticlimactic. The 5-colored spiritual light flashed violently a few times, and the massive claw projections somehow suddenly disappeared without a trace into the waterfall of light, as if they had never even existed in the first place. Han Li was rather bewildered by the scenes unfolding before his eyes, and he retreated as a precautionary measure. 5-colored spiritual light flashed from his peacock body, and he suddenly appeared over 200 feet away. Letter 1D4 BB, letter 1D4 C7, letter 1D452, letter 1D626, letter 1D638, letter 1D452. Letter 1d4 b8, letter 2134, letter 1d6 2e. After its final attack proved to be ineffective, the monstrous moth could only glower at Han Li with resentment and fury in its eyes. However, in the next instant, the poison spread upward, and its two heads also took on a dark purple hue. The monster's body then shuddered one last time, and its eyes glazed over as it plummeted toward the ground. Right at this moment, the five-colored phoenix shrank down before reverting back into Han Li's human form, and he looked on at the plummeting moth with a cold expression, showing no intention of giving chase. The giant moth's purple body crashed onto the icy island down below, before falling completely still. Only then did Han Li make a grabbing motion, and a silver ball of flames appeared out of thin air before him. It was none other than the spirit engulfing heavenly flames that had been trapped by the monstrous moth earlier. The silver fireball immediately hurtled downward at Han Li's behest, transforming into a shimmering silver fire raven along the way. The bird flew through the air as it headed directly for the giant moth's carcass, preparing to plunge headfirst onto its remains. Right at this moment, the moth's two massive heads suddenly exploded in unison to form a vast expanse of blood mist. Two fist-sized balls of green flames emerged from within the mist, then fled in opposite directions. Han Li immediately made a hand seal upon seeing this, and spatial fluctuations erupted in the air above the two balls of green flames, following which two clumps of azure threads emerged out of thin air. The azure threads dispersed before ensnaring the two green fireballs in a flash, and regardless of how vehemently the green flames struggled, they were unable to break free from the restrictive threads. At this moment, a small green cauldron appeared nearby, and Han Li pointed a finger toward it from afar. The silver fire raven that was flying toward that direction exploded amid a dull thump, then flew through the air as two silver fireballs before striking the pair of trapped green fireballs with unerring accuracy. A pair of shrill shrieks rang out, and the two balls of green flames converged within the silver flames to form a pair of eyeball-like objects. The pair of eyeballs turned toward Han Li, and they blinked as a peculiar light flashed from within them. Han Li's heart jolted upon seeing this, and he reflexively disappeared on the spot. At the same time, the two green eyeballs were completely reduced to nothingness within the silver flames. Only then did Han Li reappear over 100 feet away amid a flash of azure light, and his brows were tightly furrowed as he looked down from above. The souls of high-grade beings were most definitely quite useful, but he didn't dare to keep them in case they possessed certain abilities that could harm him. As for using a soul search technique, that was not advisable on beings of a higher cultivation base than himself, as he could easily suffer spiritual backlash. However, Han Li was quite surprised by the fact that this monster possessed two independent souls. Furthermore, the pair of eyeball-like objects that the souls manifested into in the end were also rather peculiar. After conducting a thorough examination of his own body, Han Li didn't discover anything amiss, so it appeared that the spirit engulfing heavenly flames had eradicated those two objects before they could unleash any abilities. With that in mind, Han Li heaved a faint sigh of relief as he swept a sleeve through the air. Immediately thereafter, his spirit engulfing heavenly flames, heaven void cauldron, divine essence effused mountain, and azure bamboo cloudswarm swords all flew back toward him before disappearing into his body. Only then did Han Li slowly descend toward the giant moth carcass down below. Unbeknownst to Han Li, right after he had slain the monstrous moth, a sequence of events was unfolding in a palace constructed from flawless white jade located deep within the pitch-black ocean. There were 12 ancient copper lamps placed in a row on the ground within a dark secret chamber on the deepest level of the palace. These lamps were each around a foot tall, and there were faint green flames of different sizes flickering within the lamps. Letter 1D487, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D66C, letter 1D65A, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. There was a tall and thin humanoid figure seated with their legs crossed in a motionless manner in front of the ancient lamps. The humanoid figure had its head lowered, and its entire body as well as its face was concealed under a golden cloak. There was a series of strange patterns emblazoned onto the cloak, and it was shimmering with spiritual light. In the instant that Han Li had destroyed the two souls of the monstrous moth, one of the medium-sized lamps was suddenly snuffed out. A strange creaking sound rang out from the humanoid figure's body as it slowly raised its head, and two balls of green flames appeared, instantly revealing its true appearance. The humanoid figure had a white skeletal face, and the two balls of silver flames were burning within its eye sockets, creating a very eerie and unsettling scene to behold. The skeletal head turned to appraise the snuffed-out ancient lamp with a cold look in its eyes, and it let loose an enraged harumph as it suddenly opened its mouth to expel a ball of black light. The object that had been expelled was a square black seal. The object was extremely smooth, but there was an inky black true dragon carved onto its surface, revolving several times around the seal. The skeleton uttered a strange incantation, and a swath of black light swept forth from the black seal, following which a giant black object appeared. Under the dim light of the lamps in the secret chamber, the black object was revealed to be an azure beast that was around 30 to 40 feet in length with the head of a giant cow. The monster lay motionlessly on the ground, and if it weren't for the slight rise and fall of its chest, one could be forgiven for thinking that it was a dead carcass. The skeleton opened its mouth, and a pea-sized ball of fire flew forth from within, then disappeared into the monster's body in a flash. The monster shuddered, and a series of cracks and pops sounded from its joints, following which it opened its eyes and rose to its feet. It looked around in a confused manner initially, but a hint of clarity soon crept into its eyes, and its hands balled up into fists as it threw back its head and let loose a loud roar. A rumbling thunderclap erupted, and arcs of azure lightning surfaced over the beast's body. The skeleton suddenly let loose a string of inhuman screeches, as if it were giving the monster a series of instructions. The cow-headed monster nodded before the arcs of lightning emanating from its body intensified in brightness, and it abruptly disappeared amid another thunderclap using a lightning movement technique. The secret chamber turned dim and silent again following its departure. The green flames in the eye sockets of the skeleton flashed, and it cast its gaze toward the ancient lamp that had just been snuffed out before pointing a skeletal finger toward it. Following a barely audible thump, the flame in the lamp was relit, but it was only a feeble pea-sized flame that looked as if it could be snuffed out by a gentle breeze. After doing all that, the green flames in the skeleton's eye sockets flashed a few times, and it withdrew its gaze from the ancient lamp as it cocked its head to the side in deep thought. However, in the next instant, it suddenly swiped a finger through the air and drew a circle up ahead. As soon as the circle took shape, spatial fluctuations erupted, and a shimmering silver mirror was manifested before the skeleton. The skeleton opened its mouth to expel a ball of green light onto the mirror, and the mirror's surface flashed with bright spiritual light before a series of images appeared on it. Some of these images were extremely clear, as if they were right before the skeleton's eyes, while some were quite murky and indistinct, as if they'd been concealed by something. Each and every image depicted a different setting and subject, some of which were humanoid in nature while others were beastly creatures, but all of them appeared to be extremely powerful. All of a sudden, the skeleton suddenly pointed toward the mirror, and it locked onto a single image. The image depicted a young man with his hands clasped behind his back. He was hovering in midair in a completely expressionless manner and dressed in a set of azure robes. The man in the image was none other than Han Li. The skeleton appraised the image of Han Li in the mirror with a cold expression for a long while before waving a hand through the air in a nonchalant manner. A crisp crack immediately rang out, and the mirror shattered down the middle before dissipating into specks of azure light. The green flames within the skeleton's eye sockets then burned for a while longer before they were also snuffed out, following which it lowered its head and fell completely motionless again. Meanwhile, Han Li had just descended next to the carcass of the monstrous moth and was carefully inspecting it. With a beast of such a high caliber, many of its body parts would naturally be extremely rare and precious materials. However, the thing that interested Han Li the most wasn't the beast's inner core. Instead, it was those scales that could conjure up small crystalline shields, as well as the pair of giant wings that could manifest countless sharp blades. Despite Han Li's interest in the moth's carcass, now wasn't the time to dissect it. As such, he rustled his sleeve, and a storage bracelet shot forth from within before expelling a swath of azure light. The carcass of the monstrous moth rapidly shrank down within the azure light before being stowed away into the storage bracelet. After that, Han Li drew the storage bracelet back to him before inspecting his surroundings. After a brief pause for contemplation, azure light erupted from his body as he flew into the distance, traveling deeper into the island rather than away from it. A short while later, Han Li appeared above a cluster of buildings that had been reduced to rubble. This cluster of buildings stretched for around several kilometers, and all of them were glittering and translucent, having been constructed from glacial ice. However, all of these buildings were completely empty with only a few traces of blood and ruined scraps of clothing to indicate that they'd recently been inhabited. It seemed that everyone here had been killed by that monstrous moth. Han Li's brows furrowed as he descended toward the largest palatial building down below. However, as soon as he landed on the ground, his expression suddenly changed as he cast his gaze toward a nearby mundane-looking pavilion. "Who's there? Come out right now." Han Li's body blurred, and he abruptly appeared right in front of the pavilion with a cold expression on his face. "Please spare our lives. We're merely servants of Master Silver Shark." A female voice sounded from within the pavilion. Immediately thereafter, a group of several tens of young men and women emerged from within. This was quite a youthful-looking group of beings, with most of them appearing to be around 16 to 17 years of age, and they were led by a white-robed woman who appeared to be in her 20s. As soon as they emerged from the pavilion, all of them knelt down before Han Li with horrified expressions on their faces. Han Li glanced at this group of beings, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. At first glance, these beings appeared to be identical to normal human mortals, and none of them possessed any magic power. But upon closer inspection, one would realize that that was not actually the case. All of these young men and women had remarkably translucent skin, and faint glacial chi was emanating from their bodies. They were also quite sparsely dressed considering the air temperature, and they didn't seem to be fazed by the frosty conditions in the slightest. Han Li raised an eyebrow, and he was just about to ask them a question when he suddenly turned toward another direction. Moments later, spiritual light flashed in the distance, and two streaks of light shot forth rapidly through the air, reaching the nearby area after just a few flashes. The lights then faded to reveal a pair of slender figures. They were none other than Xianxia and the woman in black. As soon as the two women appeared, expressions of shock and elation appeared on their faces. "Senior Han, if you're here, then does that mean the giant moth?" Xiao's voice trailed off as an incredulous look appeared on her face. The woman in black beside her also awaited Han Li's answer with bated breath. "I've already killed that thing," Han Li replied with a smile. He flicked his wrist, and the giant moth carcass was dumped onto the ground before him with a dull thump. The two women were naturally ecstatic at the sight of the carcass, and Xiao heaved a long sigh of relief before extending a grateful bow toward Han Li. "Thank you for taking care of this abhorrent beast, Senior Han. Not only did you save the two of us, you've also saved countless more beings on our flame coral islands who would have undoubtedly perished to this thing." The woman in black had also adopted a more respectful demeanor as she chimed in. "Indeed, even Layman's silver shark was no match for this monster. If it had been allowed to wreak havoc to its heart's content, then countless lives would have been lost. We are extremely grateful that you've eradicated such a major threat to everyone, Senior Han." "There's no need to thank me. This beast was a little troublesome to deal with, but I just so happen to have mastered a few cultivation arts that are perfect for combating its abilities." "You're far too modest, Senior. This is the first time this being has appeared here, and at the time, we were discussing with our fellow Taoists a course of action to hunt down that sea beast. All of a sudden, this moth flew out of the mist and onto the island, and many of our fellow Taoists were caught off guard before falling to its roars. Thankfully, Layman's silver shark managed to delay the beast for a short while, thereby allowing some of us to escape. Otherwise, we would have most likely all perished already." There was still a hint of fear in Xiao's eyes as she recalled the horrors of the monstrous moth. Letter 1D6ATF, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D41, letter 1D430, letter 1D68T, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D55E. Han Li's brows furrowed as he nodded before turning to the group of young men and women who had just emerged from the pavilion. "Are these the native inhabitants of this island? Their constitutions seem to be rather special, but they're not cultivators." These are glacial essence beings. These beings are unable to draw the world's origin chi into their bodies, but they can blast some glacial chi out of their mouths, and they'll maintain their appearances after reaching full maturity, only reverting to their rightful elderly appearance in the instant that they pass away from old age. They're considered to be a rather rare race, with a population of only around 10,000 on the entire flame coral islands. However, due to the fact that the race can't produce any cultivators, they're forced to become subsidiaries to other powerful races or prominent powers. This group of glacial essence beings are the servants of the late Layman Silver Shark, the woman in black explained. Now that Layman Silver Shark is dead, they'll have to seek protection from another power, Xiao sighed, seemingly feeling rather sympathetic toward these glacial essence beings. "Oh, that's quite interesting." This was the first time that Han Li had heard of such a race, and he couldn't help but take an extra glance at this group of beings. Upon hearing the conversation between Han Li and the two women, the white-robed woman, who appeared to be the leader of the glacial essence beings, immediately to kowtow to the trio, and the other glacial essence beings behind her hurriedly followed suit. Are all of you planning to seek refuge under Mr. Han? If that's the case, you may as well take them, Mr. Han. These glacial essence beings are quite useful for organizing cave abodes and looking after medicine gardens, the woman in black said with a smile. Oh, they're skilled at nurturing spirit medicines. Han Li was rather surprised to hear this. They're not just skilled in the craft. Their aptitude in that area far exceeds even most upper-race cultivators. These beings were able to take refuge under Layman's silver shark, so they're definitely the cream of the crop among their race. If news were to spread that they were looking for a new master, many upper-race beings would be clamoring to take them, Xianxia explained with a smile. It's a pity that I'm used to traveling alone, so I don't like having people with me. If you two would like to take them, then feel free to do so. Han Li immediately refused with a shake of his head. In that case, then we'd be more than glad to take them. I really in need of servants in my cave abode. Sister Qing, how about we split them evenly among us? The woman in black asked as she turned to Xianxia with a smile. I already have more than my fair share of servants on my island, so you can take all of them if you like. Xianxia replied with a nonchalant smile. The woman in black nodded in response, before asking the glacial essence beings whether they'd be willing to come with her. Their original master had already perished, so the glacial essence beings naturally weren't going to refuse the woman's offer. As such, all of them agreed in a respectful manner. After that, they cleaned up the largest palatial building at the woman's behest before inviting Han Li's trio into the palace. What are your plans from here onward, Mr. Han? Do you still intend to hunt down that sea beast? Xianxia asked as she took a seat on a stone chair within the palace. I do. I've already come all this way, so I'm certainly not going to give up without giving it a try, Han Li replied in a calm manner. Xianxia and the other woman glanced at one another upon hearing this. Are you two of the opinion that I'm not capable of accomplishing such a feat? Han Li asked as he raised an eyebrow. Of course not. You were even able to slay that monstrous moth, so it's certainly not beyond the realm of possibility that you'd be able to hunt down that sea beast. However, during our past hunting trips, we relied heavily on Layman's silver shark's silver light shark to track that sea beast. Now that the spirit beast has perished along with Layman's silver shark, so it most likely won't be a simple task to find that sea beast again, the woman in black hurriedly explained. Is that so? Then how was that silver light shark able to find the sea beast? Han Li asked with a hint of surprise on his face. I heard about this from Layman's silver shark once. Apparently, his silver light shark has a natural tracking ability. As long as it's seen something once, it'll be able to sense it within a radius of 5,000 kilometers, then slowly find it. In the past, the silver light shark led all of our hunting parties to the lair of the sea beast, Xianxia explained in a grim manner. In that case, things will indeed be a little troublesome. Looks like I'll just have to travel to the rough area where the sea beast resides and try my luck there, Han Li said with furrowed brows. If you insist on hunting down this beast, why don't you for another month or so? A few more of our fellow Taoists should have survived that attack from the monstrous moth, and there are many who have yet to arrive on the island. If we can organize a hunting party, it'd at least be better than going after the beast alone, the woman in black suggested. That's most likely not going to help much. I recall that fellow Taoist Qing had once told me about the sea beast's powers. If we were to split, we'd most likely only be divided and conquered, and if we were to hunt for it together as a group, it wouldn't increase our chances of finding it any more than if I were to search for it on my own. On top of that, everything would be fine if we could hunt down the beast in a short time, but if the hunting trip drags on for too long, dissent would inevitably be bred among the party members. In that case, it would be better for me to go alone. As for everyone else, they can come along if they'd like, but I won't force them if they don't wish to accompany me, Han Li replied with a smile. The two women naturally had nothing further to add upon hearing this. If I do manage to recover the spatial cloud crystal, please assist me in repairing the teleportation formation. Rest assured, Senior, as long as you can recover the spatial cloud crystal, you can leave the teleportation formation repairs to us, the woman in black promised with a smile, and Xianxia also followed suit. Han Li nodded with a pleased look after hearing their responses. The rest of the process was quite simple. Han Li inquired about the general location where the sea beast had been sighted in the past. then set up a method through which he could contact the two women before flying away as a streak of azure light. Xianxia and the woman in black stood in front of the doors of the palace and looked on his departing figure with complex expressions on their faces. Even now, I'm still in disbelief that Senior Han was actually able to kill that monstrous moth. His cultivation base appears to be quite similar to that of Layman Silver Shark, but Layman Silver Shark was slain by that beast in a matter of mere moments. The woman in black murmured to herself. Didn't Mr. Han say that he's mastered a few cultivation arts that were perfect for combating the moth's abilities? That must be why he was able to defeat the beast, Xianxia replied with a peculiar look in her eyes. Are you really going to believe that, Sister Qing? At the very least, I'm not buying it. Setting aside that moth's strange abilities, just its demonic power alone made it comparable to a ninth-tier upper race being. Do you think it's possible that a few convenient cultivation arts could tip the scales so much in his favor that he'd be able to bridge such a vast gulf in power? The woman in black analyzed with a hint of a smile on her face. What are you trying to say? Xianxia sighed. Nothing much. I was just remembering that you're still missing a Dao companion. This Mr. Han is a perfect choice, is it not? If you don't want him, then don't blame me for swooping in, the woman in black giggled. What are you saying, sister? I've only met Mr. Han on 2 separate occasions in total. How could I possibly have such bold thoughts? Xianxia scoffed as a blush appeared on her face. What's wrong with having thoughts like this? If I recall correctly, you've been stuck at the 5th tier for many years already, right? If you could make a powerful man like Mr. Han your Dao partner, then you should be able to easily break through your bottleneck through dual cultivation. So what if you're still not very familiar with Mr. Han? Everyone starts off as strangers. As long as he doesn't leave this region, you'll have more chances to meet and interact with him. With your looks and talents, you can't tell me that he won't fall for you. The woman in black giggled with a teasing look in her eyes. Stop spouting nonsense, sister. Mr. Han has to return to his own continent sooner or later, so how could he possibly stay here for long? Besides, perhaps he already has a Dao companion. Xianxia finally managed to muster up a coherent response after forcibly recomposing herself. That's indeed an issue. However, that sea beast is extremely cunning, and this region of the sea is extremely vast. Tracking it down and killing it will be no easy task. As long as he's unable to recover the spatial cloud crystal, he'll be forced to remain on Flame Coral Islands. In that case, what does it matter if Mr. Han already has a Dao companion or not? The woman in black replied with a nonchalant shake of her head. This time, Xianxia didn't say anything in response. She merely looked on toward the direction that Han Li had departed in and heaved a barely audible sigh. Over 2 months later, a streak of azure passed over a certain region of the ocean, flying along at low altitudes. All of a sudden, the streak of azure light swerved around before flying toward another direction at several times faster than its original speed, covering a distance of over 100 feet in the blink of an eye. As such, the monstrous fish that was trying to attack it chomped down onto empty air, but the fish whipped its tail through the turbulent waves to try and pounce toward it again. Right at this moment, a loud cry rang out from within the azure light, and several tins of azure threads shot forth in a flash before revolving around the fish. The massive sea beast was instantly sliced into countless pieces, and its remains plummeted from the sky amid a rain of rank green blood that stained the entire area of the nearby ocean. The streak of azure light then continued onward toward along its original route in an unhurried manner. Within the azure light, a young man who appeared to be in his 20s was standing motionlessly atop a massive azure sword with an indifferent expression on his face. He was none other than Han Li, who had already been searching for the whale-like sea beast in this region for over 10 days. Even though he hadn't been searching for his target for a long time, he was still struck by the feeling that he was searching for a needle in a haystack. During these past few days, he had slain several similar insolent sea beasts that had attempted to attack him, but he'd found no leads indicating the whereabouts of the sea beast he was searching for. Thankfully, there were many tiny islands in this region, and they were separated by distances of several tens of kilometers at most. As such, Han Li wasn't concerned about spiritual qi expenditure. All he had to do was rest on one of those islands for a day or two every once in a while, and his magic power would be fully replenished. Of course, during this time, Han Li wasn't just solely searching for that sea beast. If one could look into his body, then they discover a golden and azure nascent soul that was several inches tall situated within his dantian, blasting forth a constant stream of nascent flames to refine the small crystalline shield that it was holding. Most of Han Li's magic power had been dedicated to this purpose. After dissecting the monstrous moth that he'd slain earlier, he procured over 100 scales from it, and refined that small crystalline shield using those scales in conjunction with some other materials. The refinement process wasn't very complex, but the materials required were rather special. Not only was this shield extremely hard and resolute, it had even inherited the monstrous moth's ability to refract light-based attacks, and that was quite a pleasing development for Han Li. After a brief hesitation, he decided to refine this treasure into his body as well. Aside from that, Han Li had also refined 360 flying sabers from the massive wings of the moth, each of which was around an inch in size. These flying sabers were all extremely sharp and could easily tear through normal armor and shields. Unfortunately, the moth's beast core had been completely shattered. Otherwise, Han Li would have been interested in investigating the intricacies behind the monster's peculiar roars. After all, he still didn't know how those soundwave attacks had managed to trigger such a reaction from the true spirit bloods within his body, and this presented quite an unsettling notion to him. Who knew if his 12 awakening transformations possessed some kind of weakness that he was unaware of? What if he were to encounter an enemy with a similar ability in the future? Would the same occurrence repeat itself? And Li pondered these thoughts while aimlessly scouring the ocean down below with his eyes, as well as his spiritual sense. According to Qing Zio and her companion, this whale-like sea beast had been sighted many times in this area of the sea during the past century. As such, as long as he was willing to expend some time, there was a good chance that he'd encounter it sooner or later. Most importantly, the sea beast possessed a type of extremely potent water movement technique that made it very difficult to kill. However, during his search, he'd already devised some tactics to counteract this, so he was relatively confident in his ability to kill the sea beast after encountering it. And Li continued to sweep his gaze across the surface of the ocean, and his brows furrowed slightly. There were some low-grade sea beasts in the nearby seabed, so the whale-like sea beast most likely wouldn't be in this area. With that in mind, the streak of azure light accelerated slightly as Han Li flew further into the distance. Thus, days passed by one after another. Once every month or so, Han Li would rest on a small island for a few days to recover his magic power, then continued his search. As a result, many of the slightly more powerful sea beasts were struck by ill fortune. Those who dared to attack Han Li were naturally all slain with ease, but those that were smart enough to avoid Han Li were left alone after he ascertained that they weren't the target that he was searching for. Han Li was still yet to find the sea beast that he was looking for, but he didn't encounter a few signs that suggested that it had passed through certain areas that he was searching through. There was even an occasion where he'd found a massive piece of beasthide that the sea beast had shed, and it was extremely sturdy and resolute, making it an exceptional tool refinement material. However, Han Li didn't use it to refine any suits of armor. This section of beasthide was indeed quite sturdy, but it definitely still couldn't compare to his powerful body. Instead, he refined a few talismans using the material, including a set of 9 palaces heavenly talismans, as well as several armor origin talismans and high zenith invisibility talismans. Among the talismans recorded on that half-page of the golden Jade tome, the heavenly halberd talisman was the only one that he still couldn't refine. However, ever since Han Li had progressed to the spatial tempering stage and gained superior control over the world's origin chi, a whole new world seemed to have been opened up to him, and he received some inspiration that took him closer to being able to refine the heavenly halberd talisman. Of course, he still didn't know when he'd be able to refine the talisman, but he was at least making progress. Time flew by in a flash, and before Han Li knew it, he'd been roaming this region of the ocean for several years. However, he wasn't in any hurry. He'd only just recently progressed to the spatial tempering stage, so there were still many things that he had to slowly learn over time. During these past few years, he was unable to cultivate his magic power much, but he'd made large strides in many of his cultivation arts and abilities. On this day, Han Li was flying along at a leisurely rate, while pondering a certain cultivation art as usual, when he suddenly heard a strange cry erupt in the extremely far distance. This was a cry that he'd never heard before, and he stirred as blue light flashed through his eyes. Moments later, an elated look appeared on his face as he cast his gaze into the distance. "I've finally found it, but what's that thing battling it right now?" Han Li murmured to himself as he transformed into an azure thread before accelerating into the distance. After just a few flashes, the azure thread had covered a distance of several thousand feet, and following one final flash, it disappeared from view. Close to small island several hundred kilometers away, dark clouds obscured the entire sky, and the ocean was raging with turbulent waves as two colossal creatures faced off against one another. One of them was a giant crimson prawn that was over 2,000 feet in length. It was half sprawled over a massive rock and possessed a translucent and smooth hard exoskeleton. In the ocean not far away from the rock, there was a whale-like sea beast that was about twice the size of the giant prawn. The sea beast possessed an identical body and tail to those of a whale, but the only difference was that its entire head was covered in scales, and there were also golden horns and pair of long feelers protruding from its head, making it akin to the head of a worm. The two giant beasts appraised one another with caution in their eyes, and the giant prawn was roaring incessantly. All of the dark clouds and turbulent waves in the nearby area had been conjured up by this massive beast. In contrast, the giant whale-like monster was merely floating along in a completely silent, wraith-like manner. However, its eyes were fixed firmly on the giant crimson prawn, and there was a hint of greed flashing through its eyes. Even though the prawn was causing a massive commotion, while the giant whale was quite silent and subdued in comparison, one could sense that the prawn was a lot more uneasy and was merely kicking up a ruckus in a futile attempt to intimidate its opponent. All of a sudden, the whale-like sea beast suddenly turned toward a certain direction with a hint of bewilderment in its eyes. Moments later, spiritual light flashed in the distance in that direction, and a barely visible azure thread shot forth toward them at an incredible speed, making no effort to disguise or conceal itself in the process. Even the crimson prawn couldn't help but turned toward the azure thread with a wary look on its face. The azure light receded, and Han Li appeared in the air directly in between the two giant beasts in a wraith-like manner, then looked down at them expressionlessly. "There's no mistaking it, this is the beast I'm searching for. And there's also a bloodfire prawn here as well. I'm in luck," Han Li murmured to himself in an excited manner. Immediately thereafter, he swept both sleeves through the air at once, and a clear cry rang out within one of his sleeves before several tens of small azure swords came flying out from within. The flying swords hurtled toward the whale-like sea beast, but suddenly disappeared into space mid-flight. Meanwhile, a black shadow emerged from within his other sleeve, and it swelled drastically in size to form a massive black mountain that came crashing down toward the bloodfire prawn. At the same time, Han Li made a hand seal, and brilliant golden light erupted from his body as he conjured up the golden projection with 3 heads and 6 arms. The projection's 6 arms swept through the air, and 6 pillars of golden light shot forth, 3 of which were aimed toward the prawn while the other 3 flashed toward the whale-like sea beast. Han Li had attacked both sea beasts at once, and he wasn't holding back in the slightest. After activating his Provenance True Devil Arts to its maximal extent, the speed at which the pillars of golden light was traveling through the air was downright incredible. After just a single flash, they were upon the 2 sea beasts. Both of the sea beasts' hearts jolted with shock, and the whale-like sea beast opened its mouth to expel a ball of blue light, while the giant prawn conjured up a layer of crimson light that encapsulated its entire body. A string of dull thumps rang out, and as soon as the 3 pillars of golden light made contact with the blue light, the latter was instantly destroyed, leaving the pillars of light to strike the whale's massive body. A sharp cry immediately escaped from the sea beast's mouth as 3 gaping holes were blasted into its body. Blood gushed out like fountains from those puncture wounds, and the flow of blood simply refused to stop. The whale-like sea beast was naturally extremely stunned to see this. The ball of blue light that it had unleashed didn't appear to be very noteworthy, but it was an extremely powerful defensive ability that drew on the essential power of water, and it had saved its life on countless occasions in the past. As such, it was quite alarmed by the fact that the 3 pillars of golden light were able to pierce through it so easily, and it was immediately struck by a sense of foreboding. The damage inflicted on its body by the golden light wasn't a cause for concern. The sea beast merely shook its mountainous body, and the sea around it tumbled and surged, following which countless specks of blue light emerged from the seawater before instantly filling its wounds. Following a flash of spiritual light, the puncture wounds on its body were completely healed. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly upon seeing this. Meanwhile, the other 3 pillars of golden light also struck the layer of crimson light, and even though the latter was once again vanquished with ease, the golden pillars of light had somehow become a lot thinner and weaker than they originally were. The pillars of light struck the crimson prawn's exoskeleton amid 3 dull thumps, and the prawn's massive body shuddered before it flung off the rock that it was perched on. However, only 3 indentations that were several inches deep had been left in its exoskeleton, and it hadn't been punctured by the golden light. Han Li was quite surprised to see this, but that didn't stop him from continuing in his assault. Right after the crimson prawn was blasted away by the 3 pillars of light, the small black mountain was already crashing down toward it. The massive prawn's 2 front claws suddenly glowed with crimson light before expanding to several times their original size, and it hoisted them up into the air, preparing to use its immense strength to withstand the descending divine essence-effused mountain. It was no wonder that the beast would be so complacent. After all, its massive body was around 2,000 feet in length, while the small mountain was only just over 1,000 feet tall, so theoretically, there was no reason why it wouldn't be able to keep the mountain at bay. However, as soon as its massive claws came into contact with the underside of the black mountain, gray light flashed, and a couple of crisp cracks sounded. The pair of giant claws shuddered before being snapped into 4 segments by the enormous force of the descending mountain. The giant claws were completely shattered, but the black mountain continued to descend before crushing half of the prawn's body against the massive rock beneath it amid a rumbling boom. The entire rock tremored violently and sank several tens of feet further into the ocean. The crimson prawn roared with shock and fury while thrashing with all its might, but the black mountain was completely immovable, as if it had fused as once with the rock down below. The giant prawn had been completely immobilized by Han Li in a matter of mere moments. A hint of fear flashed through the whale-like sea beast's eyes upon seeing this, and it immediately slapped its massive tail onto the surface of the ocean. Countless water spears that were each around 10 feet in length instantly shot forth from the ocean, hurtling directly toward Han Li like a torrential storm. At the same time, more specks of blue light began to emerge from the nearby ocean before enveloping the entirety of the massive sea beast, causing its body to flash erratically. The beast could see that Han Li was far too powerful an adversary for it to engage in battle, and it immediately threw up a smokescreen before attempting to unleash its water movement technique and fleeing the scene. A peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he swept a sleeve through the air. A vast expanse of gray light surfaced before him, forming a gray light barrier that was several tens of feet in size. The gray light barrier revolved in midair, and all of the water spears that struck it disappeared without a trace like moths throwing themselves onto an open flame. The divine essence-effused light was the bane of all powers of the 5 elements, so destroying these water spears was naturally a simple task for Han Li. However, Han Li didn't even take a single glance at these water spears. Instead, his gaze remained firmly fixed on the whale-like sea beast. At the same time as he unleashed his divine essence-effused light, he had also silently activated his sword art. Just as the giant sea beast's body was beginning to blur, and it was preparing to get away, balls of azure spiritual light suddenly appeared in an area with a radius of several thousand feet around it. These balls of azure light flashed before forming 72 fist-sized azure lotus flowers, and these lotus flowers blurred before manifesting several hundred more identical lotus flowers. All of the azure lotus flowers revolved before expelling bursts of azure light that instantly combined as one, thereby forming an azure barrier of light. An extremely rich burst of wood attribute spiritual chi appeared within the light barrier, completely ensnaring the sea beast within it. All of this had been conjured up in the blink of an eye. However, the sea beast had been able to survive for so long despite the extensive efforts made to hunt it down, so it naturally possessed an extremely high level of intelligence. As such, it immediately realized that it was in a dire situation, and the blue light around its body abruptly exploded to form a dazzling ball of spiritual light. The sea beast's body then swayed before disappearing amid the ball of light like a giant bubble. In the next instant, a burst of scintillating blue light suddenly erupted from one section of the azure light barrier, following which a low roar rang out. Immediately thereafter, a miniature whale that was only around 10 feet in size appeared within the blue light, clearly having been impeded by the azure light barrier. The sea beast was naturally extremely shocked and enraged that its water movement technique had been obstructed. It opened its mouth, and a loud thunderclap erupted as it blasted forth a shimmering blue arc of lightning that struck the azure light barrier with ferocious might. However, the light barrier only rippled slightly before falling still again, having remained completely unscathed in the face of that attack. In its urgency and desperation, the top of its head suddenly opened up, and a ball of red light flew out from within. There was a square red brick enveloped within the ball of light, and it was as smooth and translucent as jade. The brick instantly swelled drastically to several feet in size, and it struck the light barrier in flash amid a thunderous boom. A ball of crimson flames erupted before intertwining with the azure light, but the result was still the same. The azure light barrier merely rippled and tremored slightly, but withstood the attack with no issues whatsoever. This time, the sea beast was truly starting to panic. Its body swayed, and it expanded to its former mountainous size once again. Immediately thereafter, brilliant blue light flashed from its body and crashed directly toward the azure light barrier. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face as he looked on from above. This spring-dawn sword formation truly is quite extraordinary. It relies mostly on illusionary techniques, but it's even more effective than the aureate sword formation when it comes to restricting all types of movement techniques. This sea beast's water movement technique has mutated slightly, but it's still been completely ensnared within this sword formation. Seeing as this beast had unintentionally fallen into the sword formation, then its fate was already sealed. Furthermore, this was a good opportunity for Han Li to test out the powers of the sword formation. With that in mind, he immediately made a rapid string of hand seals while chanting something in a low voice. A series of peculiar fluctuations then radiated from the azure light barrier in the distance, following which the barrier began to blur slightly. At this moment, the mountainous sea beast crashed into the light barrier, and an astonishing turn of events unfolded. In the instant that the sea beast's massive body came into contact with the azure light barrier, it was able to plunge directly into the barrier without any impediment, as if it had crashed headfirst into empty air. Thus, the entire giant beast appeared to have been engulfed by the light barrier. At the very least, that was how it appeared to Han Li as he looked on from above. All of a sudden, azure light flashed, and right after the giant beast disappeared, it suddenly rushed out of another section of the light barrier. The sea beast faltered slightly upon seeing this before immediately changing direction and crashing into the restriction again. However, the same process merely repeated itself over and over again, and the sea beast finally stopped as the dire nature of its situation dawned on it. Right at this moment, Han Li activated the power of the sword formation, and the azure light barrier suddenly flashed before shattering into countless pieces. Immediately thereafter, green light flashed, and a floral scent wafted through the air, striking one with the feeling that they had been teleported to a natural paradise. In the sea beast's eyes, it was currently situated within a lush forest that was so lifelike, it was impossible to tell whether it was an illusion or not. However, there was a burst of killing intent rising up from the glorious forest around it. Only after the sea beast looked down in a perplexed manner did it discover that a massive azure lotus flower had appeared beneath it. The lotus flower was close to 1,000 feet in size, and its petals were flashing with shimmering azure light. The giant beast's heart jolted with shock, yet before it had a chance to do anything, wisps of azure light suddenly surfaced in the air around it. The azure light revolved around the sea beast's body, following which it was instantly struck by an immense burst of power that completely immobilized it. In the next instant, azure light flashed, and several tens of azure pythons, each of which was as thick as a large bowl, pounced directly toward the giant beast. The azure pythons opened the mouths to reveal sets of sharp fangs, creating quite a sinister sight to behold. Half a day later, a streak of azure light rose up into the air before disappearing into the distance in a flash, leaving behind a placid stretch of seawater that showed no signs of the battle that had just taken place. Only the giant rock that had sunk several tens of feet deeper into the ocean acted as a reminder that the battle had indeed taken place. 2 years later, a piece of monumental news spread through the entirety of the Flame Coral Islands. The teleportation formation that had been in disrepair for thousands of years had been repaired, and there were already people using it to travel to the Thunder Continent. All of the more powerful cultivators on the islands were ecstatic to hear this, and they all rushed toward the teleportation formation for a chance to travel to a land rife with cultivation opportunities. Han Li's eyelids fluttered open, and he took a moment to recover from his rush of dizziness before he assessed his surroundings. He was quite relieved to find himself situated within a hall that was over 1,000 feet in size, and there was not a single person to be seen in the nearby area. However, there was a faint white restriction flashing from the walls of the building, as well as a stone gate that was firmly shut. There was a stone pillar that was several tens of feet tall situated in each of the four corners of the hall, and there was an unidentifiable glowing rock embedded onto each of the pillars to illuminate the entire hall. And Lee looked down to find that he was standing atop a massive teleportation formation. Thus, he made his way out of the formation without any hesitation and strode directly toward the stone gate. He pushed the gate open to find that it was virtually completely weightless despite its hefty appearance, and he was immediately greeted by a set of lively and bustling scenes. Han Li was caught completely off guard and slightly startled by this development. Han Li hurriedly cast his gaze around him, and what he saw came as quite a surprise to him. He was situated at the edge of a massive plaza that was tens of thousands of feet in size. The plaza had been paved using some kind of white stone, and there were countless beings situated on top of it. Most of these beings were humanoid in nature and wearing different types of armor. Some of them had extraordinarily long rabbit-like ears, some had black fur all over their bodies, some were as tall and broad as massive apes, and some were completely encapsulated in suits of shimmering golden armor that made it impossible to glean their appearance. There were even some humanoid beings with serpentine lower bodies. These were clearly beings from the Nag race. The most common demographic among them was a type of green-skinned foreign beings. All of them wore suits of green armor and wielded shimmering red halberds. Despite the diversity in the species among these beings, one thing remained constant, and that was that all of them wore extremely concerned looks on their faces. There were some beings among them who were emanating magic power fluctuations, but most of them were at around the foundation establishment stage or the core formation stage. There were nascent soul stage and deity transformation stage beings among them as well, but those beings totaled only around 100. All of them were gathered in groups of varying sizes while discussing something, and Han Li quickly swept his spiritual sense throughout the plaza to discover a group consisting of 3 spatial tempering stage foreign beings, a discovery that came as quite a surprise to him. According to Qing Zio, he should have been teleported to a small city inhabited by several small races, and generally speaking, the most powerful beings here would normally only be a handful of deity transformation cultivators. Under normal circumstances, there would only be around 4,000 to 5,000 cultivators in the entire city, but at present, there were tens of thousands of cultivators gathered on this plaza alone, among which were several that were of the same cultivation base as him, so how could he not be surprised? Could it be that this green light city had undergone some kind of drastic transformation during the thousands of years that the teleportation formation had been in disrepair? Furthermore, his spiritual sense could detect faint restriction fluctuations over the entire plaza, and everyone standing on the ground with not even a single being rising up into the air, so there was clearly a flight restriction in place. And Li took a deep breath before slowly making his way toward the bustling crowd. Just as Han Li was about to inquire someone about the situation, a dwarven spatial tempering stage foreign being with a disproportionately large and complete hairless head suddenly pulled out a wooden disc with a confused look on his face. The disc was flashing with specks of spiritual light, and there were some unfamiliar runes hovering over its surface. "What is it, Brother Yuan?" a nearby green-skinned foreign being asked. "A third-tier upper race being has suddenly appeared here. If I recall correctly, all of the teleportation formations in the city have been cut off by the Jiao Kai race. How could anyone have possibly been able to teleport here?" The big-headed being mused with a perplexed look on his face. "Is that so? Could it be that the Jiao Kai race became complacent and neglected to cut off a certain teleportation formation? In that case, let's find that being and ask them about this," the green-skinned being said with an elated look on his face. "That's impossible. I inspected all of the teleportation formations in person a few days, and none of them are functioning." The big-headed being shook his head as he stared at the wooden disc in his hand. "Let's hurry up and find that being so we can get some answers from them. Brother Yuan, you should be able to easily track down this being using your spirit light disc, right?" A being enshrouded under fiery red light suddenly interjected. That being has just appeared, and they're currently on this very plaza. I've already used the restriction to track them down." The big-headed being pointed toward Han Li as he spoke. The other 2 beings naturally turned toward the same direction. There were many people on this plaza, and Han Li had used a secret technique to conceal his cultivation base, but he still stuck out like a sore thumb amid the group of low-grade beings around him, so the trio of spatial tempering stage beings were immediately able to find him. Han Li could sense those beings looking at him, and he also cast his gaze toward them. At the same time, a hint of surprise appeared in his eyes at how they were able to find him so quickly. However, after a brief hesitation, he voluntarily made his way over to those three beings. Moments later, he had arrived before the group of spatial tempering stage beings. "You must be new here in Green Light City, right, fellow Taoist? May I ask your name?" The big-headed being asked in a calm manner as spiritual light flashed from his hand, following which the wooden disc abruptly disappeared. Letter 1D487, letter 1D493, letter 1D486, letter 1D486, letter 1D66C, letter 1D486, letter 1D484, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. "My surname is Han, and I've indeed just arrived in this city. What's going on here? Are you all going to war?" Henley asked in an indifferent manner. "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, fellow Taoist Han. You must have teleported here from a very faraway place, right? Otherwise, there's no way that you'd be unaware of the feud between our 13 heavenly cloud races and the Jiao Kai race," the big-headed being said with a peculiar look on his face. The Jiao Kai race. Han Li's expression changed drastically upon hearing this. This race was one of the top 10 most powerful races in the entire spirit realm. "We'll fill you in on everything else later, Brother Han. For now, please tell us how you were able to teleport to Green Light City. All of the teleportation formations should have been cut off by the Jiao Kai race already," the green-skinned being asked. "I teleported here from the other side of the ocean," Han Li replied in a truthful manner. "The other side of the ocean? Are there such teleportation formations that lead to a small city like this one?" the being enshrouded under red light exclaimed in a surprised manner. "There are indeed two such formations, but they've been destroyed many years ago. Which teleportation formation did you use to get here, fellow Taoist Han?" A hint of surprise also appeared in the big-headed being's eyes. Countless thoughts were racing through Han Li's mind, but he merely gave a simple and concise response. "The Flame Coral Islands." "I see. If I recall correctly, that teleportation formation had been destroyed thousands of years ago. Would you be able to explain how you were able to use that formation to get here, fellow Taoist Han?" A skeptical look appeared on the big-headed being's face upon hearing this. "Sure." Thus, Han Li provided a brief recount of how he'd gotten to this city. However, he refrained from revealing any details of his past, so everyone naturally formed the false impression that he was a cultivator from this region of the sea rather than someone who had come from a faraway continent. "Even though I managed to recover the spatial cloud crystal, a mishap occurred during the repair process of the teleportation. Perhaps the recorded method of repair was incorrect, or perhaps the spatial cloud crystal underwent some change during its time spent in the sea beast's body. In any case, only one person can use the teleportation formation at a time, and at least 7 days have to pass between one bout of teleportation and the next. Otherwise, the formation would instantly be destroyed," Han Li explained in a gloomy manner. "Due to those constraints, it would be impossible for him to try and leave this city using the teleportation formation." The three beings were all quite excited to hear the first part of Han Li's story, but the excitement in their eyes gradually faded after hearing about the constraints of the teleportation formation. "So that means we won't be able to use the teleportation formation until 7 days have gone by," the green-skinned being said in a disappointed manner. "That's right," Han Li sighed in response. The three foreign beings glanced at one another before the big-headed being said, "It's not that we don't trust you, fellow Taoist Han, but this is an extremely important matter, so we'll have to verify your claims for ourselves. You don't mind, do you, Brother Han?" "Of course no," Han Li replied with a smile. "Brother Hong, you stay here for now. The two of us will go and assess that teleportation formation," the big-headed being said in a solemn manner to the being enshrouded under red light. "All right." The being enshrouded under red light hesitated momentarily, but nodded in agreement in the end. Thus, his two companions were led toward the edge of the plaza by Han Li. Moments later, the three of them arrived back at the hall that Han Li had first emerged from. The green-skinned being swept his spiritual sense through the hall before remarking, "I can sense faint, residual traces of spatial fluctuation, so someone has indeed just used the teleportation formation here." Meanwhile, the big-headed being made his way into the teleportation formation and carefully inspected it before making a hand seal to cast a burst of green light onto the formation. A buzzing sound instantly rang out from the teleportation formation, and a layer of faint white light also appeared. The green-skinned being's eyes immediately widened with elation upon seeing this. However, the buzzing sound suddenly cut off in the next instant, and the white spiritual light also fizzed out as the teleportation formation fell completely silent again. No good. The formation on the other side is very unstable and has already been closed, the big-headed being said as a grim look appeared on his face. The same expression also surfaced in the green-skinned being's eyes. Is the situation in the city really that dire? Would you two be able to tell me about the situation concerning the Jiao Kai race? Hanli asked in a calm voice. What more needs to be said? As you saw, tens of thousands of cultivators have gathered at this small city, and most of them fled to this city from the nearby region, so they could use the teleportation formations here to make their escape. However, the Jiao Kai race acted extremely quickly, and all of the teleportation formations connecting this city to other cities have been disabled. Either those cities have already been conquered, or all of the teleportation formations in this city have been cut off by the Jiao Kai race. Seeing as you were able to arrive in this city, the former is the likeliest of the two scenarios. The initial forces of the Jiao Kai race have already arrived at the city, and they're awaiting the arrival of the main army. We've gathered everyone here and are planning to abandon the city so we can get away from here before it's too late. However, it's yet to be seen whether we'd even be able to escape from this place. At the very least, they definitely wouldn't allow high-grade beings like us to escape without a fight, the big-headed being explained with a wry smile on his face. Han Li's expression immediately darkened upon hearing this. Right at this moment, a dull rumbling thump suddenly erupted from the outside the stone gate, following which the layer of white spiritual light surfaced along the walls. The spiritual light flashed sporadically, and the ground tremored violently as if the entire building were about to collapse. What's going on? These tremors naturally couldn't harm these three spatial tempering stage beings in any way, but they were all still quite alarmed by this sudden development. The green-skinned being exchanged a glance with the big-headed being before both of them rushed out of the hall in unison. One of them transformed into a streak of azure light that flew out of the building, while the other merely blurred before disappearing on the spot. Even though there was a flight restriction imposed on the entire plaza, beings of their cultivation base could naturally still fly if they wanted to. Doing so would only expend more magic power than normal. And Li didn't waste any time, either. He glanced at the teleportation formation and hesitated momentarily before abruptly sweeping a sleeve through the air. A streak of azure light shot forth before revolving around the formation, completely demolishing it before the streak of azure light returned to him. Only then did Han Li exit the hall, leaving a trail of afterimages in his wake. As soon as he emerged from the stone hall, he discovered that the entire plaza had been plunged into complete chaos. Countless beings were scrambling to rush into the buildings around plaza, while a blue light barrier had appeared in the air above, seemingly encompassing the entire city beneath it. In the air above the light barrier, countless head-sized balls of white light were raining down in a torrential assault. The balls of white light exploded as they crashed into the light barrier, and the latter tremored violently amid resounding booms, seemingly only barely able to withstand the ferocious attacks. Han Li was quite stunned to see this, and he hurriedly cast his gaze outside of the light barrier as blue light flashed through his eyes. Moments later, Han Li's eyelids twitched as he drew a sharp breath. Through the use of his spirit eyes ability, he had identified what was unleashing the oncoming attacks. A gigantic island had appeared in the air at altitudes of around 30,000 to 40,000 feet. That's right, it was a shimmering island that appeared to have been forged from pure silver, and it was close to 100,000 feet in size. The entire island was riddled with white crystalline pillars that were shimmering with countless runes. These pillars were blasting forth one ball of light after another that were crashing down upon the light barrier overhead. Meanwhile, the big-headed being pulled out a blue mirror and looked into it before his expression changed drastically, and he suddenly exclaimed, "This is bad. That's a giant battle arc of the Jiao Kai race. How could this be? Could it be that their army has arrived earlier than anticipated? There's no use thinking about such matters right now. Our top priority is to get away from here as quickly as possible. Brother Yuan, you've been in this city for many years, so surely you know of a few secret passageways that lead out of the city, right?" The green-skinned being urged in a flustered manner. A hesitant look appeared on the big-headed being's face, but he then gritted his teeth as he said, "I do indeed know of a secret passageway that leads to a small mountain to the west close to 10 kilometers away from the city. However, I can't just abandon all of the citizens of this city. I'm going to gather everyone to the city gates and make a collective effort to escape. If we're lucky, perhaps some of us really will be able to get away." "All right, we'll do as you say." The being enshrouded under red light immediately chimed in agreement. Han Li and the green-skinned being also expressed their approval of this course of action. Thus, the big-headed being didn't hesitate any longer. Yellow light suddenly flashed from his body, following which a streak of yellow light flew forth before transforming into a massive projection that was around 1,000 feet tall. The projection was completely identical to the big-headed being, both in appearance and in attire. Not only was the projection extremely massive, it was shimmering with dazzling yellow light, so it naturally stood out quite prominently. All of a sudden, the projection let loose a low cry that was akin to the toll of an ancient bell, and everyone who heard this sound was suddenly instilled with a sense of calmness that combated the panic and anxiety in their hearts. Thus, countless pairs of eyes turned toward the massive projection overhead in unison. Only then did the projection face everyone with a solemn expression as it announced, "Don't panic, everyone. The city's protective formation is extremely resolute and will not be falling anytime soon. What you all need to do now is to gather at the 4 city gates. In 15 minutes, I'm going to withdraw the restriction so everyone can attempt to escape. However, before that, allow me to issue a reminder to all of you. The Jiao Kai race has suddenly unleashed an unannounced attack on us, so they're most likely intent on eradicating our 13 heavenly cloud races. As such, I'd advise you to refrain from trying your luck by handing yourselves over in the hopes of being spared. From what I've heard, those who have been captured by the Jiao Kai race have either been reduced to mindless slaves or have had their souls searched, and their bodies used as tool refinement or pill refinement materials." All of the beings on the plaza looked at one another upon hearing this, and someone suddenly let loose a loud cry, following which everyone dispersed and rushed toward one of the 4 city gates. Thus, the big-headed being made a hand seal, and the projection in the air above instantly disappeared. After that, he turned to Han Li's trio and said, "Come with me, fellow Taoists. The Jiao Kai race will be making an extra effort to target us, so we can't escape with the others as that would only place them in even more danger." All 3 nodded in agreement, and the 4 of them instantly flew out of the plaza together as 4 streaks of light. At this point, the blue light barrier overhead had already been completely inundated by the white light resulting from the explosions of the balls of light. The barrier began to emit a low buzzing sound, which was an indication that the formation was at its very limits. The big-headed being looked up into the sky with a bitter expression as he flew through the air. "Are you still reluctant to part with this city, Brother Yuan?" the being enshrouded under red light asked. "I've been residing here in Green Light City for over 1,000 years, and I created all of the restrictions and formations here, so of course I'm unwilling to part with all of this," the big-headed being sighed in a forlorn manner. "There's no need to be so depressed, Brother Yuan. The Jiao Kai race may be quite powerful, but if our 13 heavenly cloud races were to combine our powers, we'd definitely be able to match up against them. Perhaps this city will be recovered one day," the being enshrouded under red light consoled. "I certainly hope so," the big-headed sighed with a wry smile on his face. "Brother Yuan, how was the Jiao Kai race army able to get here so quickly? Didn't our scouts report back that it'd still take them 2 more days to get here? Could it be that the army hasn't actually arrived, and the initial forces of the Jiao Kai race are responsible for this attack?" the green-skinned being asked. "I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that either. What we do know is that there definitely weren't any battle arcs among the ranks of the Jiao Kai race's initial forces, but the battle arc that's appeared now is a fortress-level battle arc, which is only below the realm-level and city-level battle arcs of their race. There's a very good chance that there are beings of the 3 holy race tiers within that arc, and we certainly can't hope to contend with such powerful beings," the big-headed being replied with a grim shake of his head. "HMPH, even without any beings of the holy race tiers in there will definitely be no shortage of beings with cultivation bases comparable to ours in there, so we'll still have to run for our lives anyway. We can only hope that the beings in the ark haven't noticed us and have instead been drawn to the other beings fleeing the city instead," the being enshrouded under red light chuckled. Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing this, and he turned to the big-headed being to gauge his reaction, only to find that he remained completely indifferent, showing no intention to refute those claims. Han Li immediately came to a realization upon seeing this. These beings were making themselves sound quite heroic in that they were escaping on their own for the sake of everyone else in the city, but they were merely using everyone as bait to lure away their enemies while they fled the scene. Han Li was a little shaken by this realization, but he didn't say anything about it. After all, these three were merely trying to save themselves, so they weren't really doing anything wrong. However, Han Li still reflexively became more wary of these three beings. With their cultivation bases, all four of them naturally flew extremely quickly, and it only took them mere moments before they arrived in front of a seemingly ordinary pavilion. The pavilion's doors were tightly shut, and before the big-headed being had even landed on the ground, he swept a sleeve through the air to send forth a gust of fierce winds. The doors of the pavilion were instantly shattered into nothingness, as if they'd been struck by an immense force, and all four of them flew directly into the building. The first floor of the pavilion was completely empty aside from a few tables and chairs, as well as a statue of an unknown deity that was several tens of feet tall, positioned against one of the walls. The statue was entirely black in color and had a bulging stomach along with 4 eyes and 4 arms. It was seated in a cross-legged manner, and its legs were disproportionately thin and frail compared to its massive stomach, thereby creating a rather peculiar sight to behold. Han Li and the others swept their eyes around the room, but failed to find any entrances leading to the aforementioned passageway, and all of them turned to the big-headed being once again. The big-headed being disregarded everyone's inquisitive expressions as he made his way over to the black statue. He opened his mouth, and a round yellow gem shot forth from within, then disappeared into the statue's head in a flash. A burst of piercing light flashed, following which a series of ripples proliferated over the surface of the statue. All of a sudden, yellow light flashed from the statue's 4 eyes, and it suddenly rose to its feet. Han Li and the others were quite stunned to discover that this statue was actually a puppet. As the big-headed being made a series of hand seals, an even more astonishing turn of events unfolded. The puppet waved its 4 arms through the air, and its body expanded to about twice its original size amid a flash of brilliant yellow light. Its massive stature took up virtually the entire space on the first floor of the pavilion, and it patted all 4 of its arms onto its stomach at once. Spiritual light flashed, and a peculiar rune surfaced on its belly. A crisp crack then rang out as a small entrance suddenly appeared on its stomach, beyond which was a space that was several tens of feet in size. There was a small teleportation formation around 10 feet or so in size situated on the ground within that space, and the big-headed being rushed into the puppet's stomach without any hesitation before standing atop the teleportation formation. Fellow Taoists, this formation leads straight into the secret passageway. I'll be going ahead first. The big-headed being smiled before casting an incantation seal onto the teleportation formation. White light flashed from the formation, and the big-headed being abruptly disappeared, leaving behind only the deity statue in his wake. Brother Yuan sure is resourceful to have installed a teleportation formation inside this puppet of his. The green-skinned being chuckled before also striding into the puppet's stomach, and he also cast an incantation seal onto the teleportation formation before abruptly vanishing on the spot. "You can go before me, Brother Han," the being enshrouded in red light offered. Han Li was rather surprised by this gesture, but his expression remained unchanged as he nodded and strode forward. The teleportation was extremely quick, and Han Li appeared within a dim and dank cave before he had even experienced any discomfort. He looked around to find that this was only a small cave just over 100 feet in size, but there was a glowing crystal hanging from the roof of the cave that illuminated his surroundings. On one face of the cave was a square entrance to a passageway that was around 10 feet tall. The big-headed being and the green-skinned being were already there, and the former was inspecting a formation plate in his hand with a grim look on his face, seemingly in deep thought about something. Han Li's body swayed, and he exited the teleportation formation. Moments later, white light flashed within the formation once again, and the being enshrouded under red light also appeared. Seeing as everyone was present, the big-headed being raised his head with a smile and was just about to say something, when a dull rumbling erupted around them from all directions, and the entire cave began to tremor slightly. Everyone's expressions immediately changed slightly in response to this alarming development. "Let's hurry up and get out of here. The city's protective barrier won't last much longer," the green-skinned being urged. "All right, I'll lift the restrictions on the city gates so everyone else can flee first." The big-headed being nodded with a solemn expression before tossing the formation plate in his hand into the air before making a rapid series of hand seals. Incantation seals of different colors disappeared into the formation plate in quick succession, following which the plate suddenly exploded amid a dull thump. Han Li's trio were all quite taken aback by this. Detonating a formation plate normally brought about much severe implications than just lifting a restriction. The big-headed being seemed to have sensed their bewilderment, and he chuckled. "I've already activated a self-detonation formation below Green Light City, and the entire city will be reduced to ashes in 2 hours." A chill immediately ran down Han Li's spine upon hearing this. This big-headed being really was quite a nasty piece of work. Even though most of the beings in the city had fled to the city gates, there were definitely many mortals as well as cultivators who were hiding within the city in the hopes of being able to weather this storm. In that case, all of them would perish along with this city. The other two beings also exchanged an astonished glance upon hearing this. However, before the three of them had a chance to say anything, the big-headed being had already flown into the passageway as a streak of yellow light. Han Li and the others naturally immediately followed suit. At this moment, massive holes with diameters of over 1,000 feet had appeared on the light barriers in front of the city's 4 gates, and all of the beings that had gathered there in advance all fled for their lives as countless streaks of light. Some sank into the ground and instantly vanished into the soil, while some rolled onto the grass and also abruptly disappeared. These were beings that were proficient in earth and wood movement techniques. However, the majority of beings were still flying through the air as quickly as they could atop their respective treasures. It seemed that everyone had already decided to split up and escape on their own, as everyone was fleeing in different directions. At this moment, the higher-ups of the Jiaokai race in that silver island had also noticed all of the beings fleeing the city. Thus, silver light immediately flashed from the giant island, following which massive twin-headed white falcons emerged. Not only did these giant falcons each possess 2 heads and bodies that were 30 to 40 feet in size, all of them were also wearing simple suits of white arms, as well as conical metal tips on their talons that appeared to be extremely sharp. There were over 1,000 of these giant falcons, and as soon as they flew out of the Silver Island, they immediately spread their wings before hurtling toward the beings escaping from Green Light City. All of them were flying at speeds no slower than that of core formation cultivators, and after these giant falcons emerged, there was still spiritual light flashing from the giant island as another vast horde of objects were ejected. On this occasion, these objects were black wooden canoes that were only around 100 feet in length each. All of these canoes had black runes carved onto them, and there were 3 to 5 silver-armored warriors sitting in each canoe. Over 100 of these black canoes flew out at once, and even though they were slightly slower than the giant falcons, they were still far faster than the vast majority of beings that were fleeing from the city. After releasing those 2 waves of pursuers, the giant island fell silent for a short while. However, not long after that, a string of dragon roars rang out, and 7 or 8 massive figures flew forth from the island. These beings all possessed bodies that were several hundred feet in length, and they each had a pair of 5-colored wings. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that they were winged worm-like beasts. Aside from their vibrant wings and the golden hue of their bodies, they were completely identical to normal worms. As soon as they emerged from the island, their massive bodies swayed, and they blurred before disappearing on the spot. In the next instant, these winged golden worms appeared around 300 to 400 feet away, flying at an astonishing speed. After these 3 waves of pursuers had been released from the giant island one after another, all of the fleeing beings became even panicked as they escaped in a blind frenzy. Letter 1D487, letter 1D493, letter 1D486, letter 1D486, letter 1D66C, letter 1D486, letter 1D484, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. Even though there were tens of thousands of these beings, the vast majority of them possessed rather lackluster cultivation bases. Those who possessed superior cultivation bases had already fled to several tens of kilometers away, while those with the most inferior cultivation bases were still less than 10 kilometers away from the city. Furthermore, the vast majority of beings fell into that latter group, and they were chased down by those twin-headed giant falcons in what felt like the blink of an eye. All of these giant falcons swooped down, sweeping up gusts of fierce winds in their wake. Their metal-tipped talons tore through the defenses of these low-grade beings with ease, then sliced through their bodies like hot knives through butter. Some of these beings were instantly torn apart, while others were flung into the air, then pecked to death by the giant falcons waiting up above. Of course, there were some beings who were unwilling to give up without a fight, and many of them banded together to release their treasures or unleash their abilities, creating a collective effort to try and ward off the oncoming falcons. However, these beings were simply far too weak, and the suits of white armor being worn by the giant falcons possessed remarkable defensive properties. As such, only a dozen or so falcons were felled by these attacks, and most of them had fallen to lucky shots that just so happened to strike vital regions peeking through the gaps between their armor. The rest of the attacks were all brushed aside with ease. All of these giant falcons were enraged by these retaliative attacks, and all of them let loose sharp cries as they swooped down to attack with increased ferocity. Thus, more anguished cries rang out as hundreds more bloodstained and mangled bodies plummeted from the sky. At this moment, the black canoes also joined the fray, and all of the armored warriors standing atop the canoes slashed their weapons through the air to summon a series of silver projections. All those who were struck by the projections were instantly dismembered without being able to offer up any resistance. Thankfully, the armored warriors had no intention of expending excessive effort to hunt down these low-grade beings. Instead, the black canoes merely continued onward, pursuing the fleeing beings with superior cultivation bases. As for the golden worms that had emerged last, they were flying directly toward the most powerful beings who had already fled far into the distance. With their fearsome speed, it wouldn't take them long to hunt down their prey either, and thus, a completely one-sided slaughter ensued. Meanwhile, azure light suddenly flashed from a mundane-looking rock face on a nameless mountain close to 10 kilometers to the west of Green Light City, following which a dull explosion suddenly erupted. Following the explosion, a large black hole was blasted into the rock face, and 4 streaks of light whizzed out from within. These 4 were none other than Han Li and the trio of foreign beings. Due to the fact that this place was quite secluded, and its direction didn't correspond with that of any of the city gates, no Jiaokai races force had appeared in the area yet. However, all 4 of them still wore cautious expressions as they hurriedly scanned through the nearby area with their spiritual sense. Let's get away from this place before the Jiaokai beings arrive. We'll have to split up from here onward. Staying together will make us too large of a target, the green-skinned being said with an elated look on his face. The big-headed being nodded before glancing at Han Li's trio with a hesitant look on his face, then suddenly said, "Of course, but before you all leave, I have something to ask of all of you, and I hope you won't refuse." "What do you need from us?" the being enshrouded under red light asked. Han Li and the green-skinned being were also rather curious to hear what he had to say. The big-headed being took a deep breath before suddenly producing 3 white jade boxes, each of which had several crimson talismans that were shimmering with runes plastered over them. These 3 boxes contain items that are extremely important to our 13 heavenly cloud races. If you can deliver them to our myriad ancient race, then you'll be rewarded handsomely for your efforts. However, if you get hunted down by the Jiaokai race, then it'd be best for you to immediately destroy the boxes before you're captured. Otherwise, if you're caught in possession of these items, the Jiaokai race will definitely torture you for information. The big-headed being flicked his wrist as he spoke, and the 3 jade boxes were immediately sent flying toward Han Li's trio. Everyone caught the jade boxes flying toward them, and the being enshrouded under red light inspected his jade box with a hesitant look as he asked, "What items are in these boxes for you to hold them in such high regard, Brother Yuan?" "Forgive me, but that's not something I can tell you. However, I can guarantee you that you can exchange those items for a sentient puppet or other treasure of the same value from the elders of our myriad ancient race," the big-headed being replied with a solemn look on his face. "What, a sentient puppet?" the green-skinned being exclaimed with shock in his eyes. Only Han Li's expression remained unchanged, as this was the first time he'd heard of such a thing. A skeptical look flashed through the eyes of the being enshrouded under red light as he said, "Are you serious, Brother Yuan? If this item can be exchanged for such an extraordinary treasure, then can I ask for a myriad wonder pill instead?" The big-headed being hesitated momentarily before replying, "Myriad wonder pills are even rarer than sentient puppets, so I can't guarantee that the elders would be willing to agree to such an exchange, but there's a good chance that they will." Rather than being discouraged by this more reserved response, the green-skinned being found his words to be more plausible instead. Thus, his fingers reflexively tightened around the jade box in his hands, and he stared at the box with an intense look in its eyes. Meanwhile, Han Li was attempting to assess the contents of the box using his spiritual sense, only for his attempts to be thwarted by some kind of restrictive power. It appeared that the talismans plastered onto the boxes were restriction talismans, capable of keeping out one's spiritual sense. I'd advise you not to open the boxes. Otherwise, if any mishaps occur, don't blame me for not warning you beforehand. The big-headed being seemed to have read everyone's minds, and he immediately issued a stern warning. HMPH, are you telling that there's something inside these boxes that can harm us? The greenskin being harumphed in a skeptical manner. The items in the boxes are extremely important to our 13 heavenly cloud races, so there were naturally more restrictions placed on them than just a few talismans. Of course, if you can escape from the Jiao Kai race and are confident in your ability to eradicate the restrictions that I've set, then you can certainly try to open the boxes. The big-headed being chuckled with a dark expression on his face. How can you guarantee that the elders of your race will actually exchange the items in these boxes for valuable treasures? What if they take these boxes and refuse to give us anything in return? Han Li asked in a calm voice. The big-headed being's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this question, and only after a long while did he begrudgingly reply, "If you don't trust our myriad ancient race, then you can give the Jade box to any race among the 13 heavenly cloud races. They should be willing to offer you handsome rewards for them as well. However, I must remind you that those items are nowhere near as important to the other races than to our myriad ancient race, so the rewards you'll receive also won't be anywhere near as bountiful. At the very least, you can completely forget about things like myriad wonder pills." The green-skinned beings and the being enshrouded under red light both fell into deep thought upon hearing this. Han Li stroked his chin, and also became quite interested in the items within the boxes. "If these items are so important, then why don't you take them back to your race yourself rather than entrusting them to us, Brother Yuan?" the being enshrouded under red light asked. "I'd only just received these items not long ago myself, and Jiao Kai race suddenly sent their forces to attack Green Light City. Keeping in mind the fact that Green Light City is by no means a major city, so theoretically, it shouldn't have come under attack so quickly. I'm concerned that the Jiao Kai race may have somehow been alerted to the fact that I'm in possession of these treasures, so it would be far too risky for me to take them back to my race on my own," the big-headed being explained in a truthful manner. "You're saying the Jiao Kai race deployed their army for the items in these boxes?" The green-skinned being drew a sharp breath as an incredulous look appeared on his face. Han Li was also quite stunned by this notion. "I'm only guessing that to be true, but it may not actually be the case. As such, I'm only entrusting these items to you three as a safety precaution," the big-headed being replied. "All right, in that case, I'll take this item for now." The being enshrouded under red light made up his mind first, and white light flashed from his hand, following which the jade box vanished. The green-skinned being seemed to be grappling with some kind of internal conflict, but he also decided to accept this task in the end. Thus, he opened his mouth, and a long translucent green tongue reached out from within before drawing the jade box into his stomach. As a result, Han Li was the only one among the three who hadn't made his decision. "You still have some doubts, Brother Han?" The big-headed being turned to Han Li with a hint of surprise in his eyes. "Fellow Taoist Yuan, you do realize that you're handing over such an important item to a complete stranger, right? Aren't you afraid that you'll be entrusting this item into the wrong hands?" Han Li asked with a hint of a smile on his face. I haven't been able to identify what kind of being you are as of yet, but I can be sure of the fact that you're definitely no Jiao Kai being. I've already deduced that it would be far too much of a risk for me to continue carrying these items, so entrusting it to you is clearly a better option," the big-headed being replied with a smile. A series of thoughts raced rapidly through Han Li's mind before he finally nodded and agreed. "All right, seeing as you've placed your trust in me and led us through your secret passageway, then I'll lend you my assistance." He swept a hand over the jade box, and it was stowed away into his storage bracelet. He didn't know what this sentient puppet and myriad wonder pill were, but for these spatial tempering stage beings to hold them in such high regard clearly indicated that they were extremely rare treasures. For the 13 heavenly cloud races to be willing to offer such precious treasures for these boxes suggested that the items they contained were even superior in value. Now that such a precious item was being handed to him, he certainly wasn't going to refuse it. In any case, judging from the conversation held between the three beings earlier, it was rather unlikely that they would be pursued by beings of the body integration stage or above, so he should be able to take care of any enemies that tried to hunt him down. As for whether he was actually going to take this item to the 13 heavenly cloud races, that was yet to be seen. The big-headed being was quite elated to see Han Li stow away his jade box, and he said, "All right, seeing as all three of you have agreed, then let's go our separate ways now. Those Jiao Kai beings are most likely hunting down all of the other beings in the city at the moment, so this is the ideal opportunity for us to get away. I'll be taking my leave first." After that, he quickly surveyed his surroundings, before suddenly tossing out a black metallic spinning top-like object. The object was only around a foot in size, but it abruptly swelled to 30 to 40 feet after the big-headed being cast an incantation seal onto it. The big-headed being then disappeared into the black top as a streak of yellow light before a thought suddenly occurred to him, and he said, "By the way, from what I've heard, all of the elders of our 13 races have gathered in Cloud City in order to combat the assault from the Jiao Kai race. Even the grand elders of a few races, including our myriad ancient race, have gathered at the city, so I hope to see all of you there in a few months." Han Li's trio stirred upon hearing this, and a contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face. He seemed to have heard Qing Zio mention this Cloud City before, but he couldn't remember the specific details off the top of his head. In any case, that didn't really matter as he had a map of the nearby area anyway. Even though it was a map from thousands of years ago, this was the cultivation world, so not much would have changed during that time. After that, the massive black top twirled in the air before transforming into a black cone of light that burrowed into the ground, vanishing without a trace. "Take care of yourselves, fellow Taoists. I'll be taking my leave as well." The green-skinned being seemed to be quite wary of the Jiao Kai race army, and he cupped his fist in a farewell salute almost as soon as the big-headed being departed. Immediately thereafter, his body blurred and became completely transparent along with his clothes. Within moments, he had disappeared into thin air. Han Li was quite startled by this development, and a blue light flashed through his eyes as he instinctively attempted to track down the green-skinned being. In the end, he was only able to barely catch sight of a virtually invisible humanoid figure flying away into the distance. That's a concealment secret technique unique to the dark green race. Only cultivators with a cultivation base significantly superior to his, or using special abilities, will be able to detect his presence after he unleashes that secret technique. The only downside is that, while using his ability, his speed is significantly hampered. The being enshrouded under red light chuckled as he caught sight of Han Li's intrigued expression. "Oh, I see," Han Li replied in an indifferent manner. Even though his speed had been hampered, the green-skinned being still quickly disappeared into a forest in the distance down below. "Are you planning to leave as well, Brother Han? Before that I have a suggestion. Would you like to hear it?" The being enshrouded under red light suddenly asked. "What is it?" Han Li asked with a hint of surprise in his eyes. "You're not from the 13 heavenly cloud races, right? In that case, why take the risk to act as their errand boy? Why don't you give me what Brother Yuan just entrusted to you?" The foreign being suggested in a calm manner. "You want that jade box?" A peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face as his eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed, I'm very interested in the item in the jade box. It makes no difference to me whether I deliver 1 box or 2 boxes to the heavenly cloud races, so why don't you allow me to do the honors in your stead?" The foreign being's voice took on a slightly sinister tone as he spoke. "What if I were to say no?" Han Li asked in an unflustered manner. "I'm sure you wouldn't be so foolish, fellow Taoist. What use would that treasures be to you if you were to perish here?" The being enshrouded under red light chuckled. "Are you going to attack me here? There are Jiao Kai beings all over the place here. Do you want to get us both captured?" A frosty look appeared on Han Li's face. The foreign being's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, but he then suddenly flipped a hand over to produce a small, translucent vial before offering it to Han Li for inspection. The vial contained a pill that was as crimson as blood, yet was radiating golden light. "Fellow Taoist Han, if you deliver the item to the myriad ancient race, then the most you'll get in return will be a myriad wonder pill. I have a golden blood pill that's only slightly inferior to that pill and can also assist you in breaking through your next bottleneck. How about you exchange your jade box for this pill of mine, fellow Taoist Han?" The being enshrouded under red light asked as he fixed his gaze firmly on Han Li. Golden blood pill. Han Li's pupils contracted slightly. It was the first time he had heard of this pill, but both his spiritual sense and the medicinal fragrance emanating from within the small vial told him that this was no ordinary pill. He stared at the translucent vial in silence, seemingly truly considering this offer. The being enshrouded in red light was quite ecstatic to see Han Li considering his offer, but his expression remained unchanged as he urged, I'd advise you to make your decision quickly, Brother Han. The Jiaokai beings could get here at any moment. What he failed to notice was that the black shadow beneath Han Li's feet had become slightly thinner and longer than before. But then again, no one would be able to notice that slight change unless they were staring intently at Han Li's shadow this entire time. At the same time, a barely visible azure thread shot forth from beneath Han Li's feet before disappearing soundlessly into the soil. "May I ask which race you're from, fellow Taoist?" Han Li suddenly asked. "What do you mean by that? I'm clearly a being from the Fire Moon race. Why would you ask a question you already know the answer to?" The foreign being harumphed coldly. "Is that so? I thought that you were Jiao Kai being who was going to take my jade box, then immediately turn on me." Han Li mused in a rather unsettling manner. The foreign being faltered slightly upon hearing this, but an enraged look then appeared on his face as he exclaimed, "I'm clearly a Fire Moon being. How could I possibly be from the Jiao Kai race? I don't care whether you're Fire Moon being or not, but are you going to deny what you did back in the pavilion after you asked me to go on ahead? How about you give your jade box to me instead, and I'll deliver both of them at once. One jade box or two makes no difference to me," Han Li said in an indifferent manner. The foreign being's expression finally changed drastically upon hearing this. As soon as Han Li's voice trailed off, the Fire Moon being suddenly made a hand seal, and red light swirled around his body as a red moon erupted into the air, then disappeared high into the sky following just a few flashes. At the same time, his body blurred, and two identical projections of himself appeared within the red light. The three identical figures clasped their hands behind their backs and appraised Han Li in an expressionless manner. Much to his surprise, Han Li suddenly rubbed his hands together and burst into laughter upon seeing this. "So you really have been plotting something this entire time. You released your spiritual power to attract the Jiao Kai beings to this place, and you're now preparing to engage me in battle, so I won't be able to leave right away." The three identical humanoid figures were all rather perplexed by Han Li's calm reaction to the situation, and one of them said in a high and mighty manner, "I don't know how you caught me leaving mark on that statue, but I've already summoned others to this place, so don't even think about getting away. If you hand over your jade box to me, I can put in a good word for you, and perhaps they'll spare your life." The Fire Moon being seemed to be very confident. That made sense, seeing as the Jiao Kai beings were less than 10 kilometers away, so it wouldn't take them long at all to get to this place. "This is what you just released, right?" A mysterious smile appeared on Han Li's face as he suddenly made a grabbing motion in a nonchalant manner. Red light flashed, and a head-sized ball of red light abruptly appeared in his hand. "Impossible! How did you do that?" The three identical humanoid figures shuddered in unison as expressions of shock and fury appeared on their faces. The red ball of light that Han Li was holding was none other than the ball of spiritual power the Fire Moon being had just released. All of a sudden, the three humanoid figures slowly backed away at once with wary expressions on their faces without waiting for a reply from Han Li. Han Li faltered slightly upon seeing this before a cold smile appeared on his face. He flipped a hand over, and white light flashed as the white jade box with red talismans plastered over its surface reappeared in his hand. He then tossed the box up into the air before flicking a finger toward it, and several streaks of azure sword chi shot forth toward it. "Are you insane?" The retreating Fire Moon being was given a massive fright by Han Li's actions, and the two projections shot forth in unison from within the red light. Both of them were traveling extremely quickly, with one of them transforming into a massive red hand that hurtled toward the jade box, while the other pounced toward Han Li with a ferocious look on his face. As for the third humanoid figure, he remained completely still within the red light in the distance. He had quite clearly sensed that Han Li was an unfathomably powerful being and had become very cautious as a result. As such, it was only manipulating its two avatars to attack Han Li while it remained a safe distance away. The two projections seemed to be far faster than Han Li had anticipated, affording him no time to react. The massive red hand grabbed onto the jade box, while the other projection flashed through the air as a streak of crimson light before puncturing Han Li's body and emerging on the other side. The crimson light then receded, and the projection reappeared several tens of feet behind Han Li before turning around to appraise him. Crimson flames erupted all over his body, and he was incinerated into nothingness within the scorching flames in the blink of an eye. The ease with which Han Li had been slain came as quite a surprise to the Fire Moon being, and a hint of foreboding welled up in his heart as opposed to triumph. Before he had a chance to further assess the situation, the jade box that the massive red hand had latched onto suddenly glowed with azure light before transforming into a fist-sized azure bead. Before the red hand had a chance to react, the bead exploded, and countless arcs of azure lightning shot forth amid a loud thunderclap, instantly puncturing innumerable holes into the massive red hand. In the end, the hand was completely vanquished and dissipated into specks of red light. Arg, the fire moon being's face paled as an expression of shock appeared in his eyes, and he opened his mouth to throw up a mouthful of shimmering green blood essence. All of a sudden, Han Li's voice rang out from all directions. I thought that you were using some kind of profound avatar creation technique, but it turns out you were merely using a soul-splitting technique. In that case, I'll be taking these two avatars of yours. Immediately thereafter, a barely visible black line flashed through the air before a long golden blade rushed toward the second fire moon being projection from down below. The golden blade was far too fast for the projection to evade, and it was sliced in half as it let loose a howl of anguish. The two halves of its body then fell to the ground and also dissipated into specks of spiritual light. Only then did golden light flash, and a golden-armored warrior wielding a long-bladed weapon slowly emerged from the soil underfoot in a wraith-like manner. After the second avatar was destroyed, the fire moon being's face paled even further, following which an unnatural flush appeared on his cheeks, indicating that losing those two avatars had dealt his body a heavy blow. However, the fire moon being was also quite decisive. As soon as his second avatar was destroyed, he immediately opened his mouth to expel a small green bell before quickly flicking a finger toward it. A deafening clang rang out, and a burst of invisible sound waves radiated in all directions with the bell at the center. A sinister expression then appeared on the fire moon being's face. There was no way that what he was doing wouldn't attract the nearby Jiao Kai beings to this place. However, he had no intention of staying here to engage Han Li in battle, either. His body swayed, and he transformed into a streak of red light before flying high up into the air. However, a cold harumph suddenly rang out, and after reaching an altitude of 500 to 600 feet, azure light suddenly flashed in the air above the streak of red light. An azure lotus flower then emerged out of thin air before multiplying at a rapid rate. Specks of azure light filled the entire sky in the blink of an eye, and all of the azure lotus flowers revolved on the spot before expanding to around 10 feet in size each. The fire moon being was stunned to see this, and he hurriedly raised both hands into the air. A short silver dagger and a shimmering golden badge shot forth in unison. As soon as the dagger left his hand, it transformed into a massive blade that was several tens of feet in length, before striking the lotus flowers overhead with tremendous force. Meanwhile, the golden badge emitted a buzzing sound, following which a shimmering golden worm projection erupted from the badge before also rushing into the air. Two resounding booms rang out as the silver blade and golden projection struck the giant azure lotus flowers almost in unison. Immediately thereafter, the azure lotus flowers were all shattered despite the runes flashing from their petals, and the fire moon being was ecstatic to see this. However, his smile then immediately congealed on his face in the next instant. After the lotus flowers had been destroyed, azure light flashed, and another massive lotus flower appeared in his path. The fire moon being's expression immediately changed as his two treasures flew on ahead with ferocious might at his behest. At the same time, he began to chant something as if he were going to unleash some other powerful ability. The giant silver blade and golden worm projection plunged into the massive azure lotus flower, and both of them disappeared without a trace. The fire moon being's heart sank upon seeing this, and he stopped cold in his tracks. Right at this moment, the azure lotus flower suddenly began to radiate scintillating light, following which a massive wave of light surged forth. The fire moon being was quite startled to see this, and he immediately unleashed the ability that he'd been preparing without any hesitation. Red light swirled all over his body as countless palm-sized red blades of light appeared out of thin air. All of the red blades flew around him at his behest, forming a red tornado that shielded his body within. The fire moon being finally heaved an internal sigh of relief, and in the next instant, the azure wave of light swept in a completely soundless manner. The fire moon being's heart jolted, and he focused his gaze around him as his surroundings blurred, following which he found himself on a lush grassland. There were countless blades of exuberant green grass growing around him, along with wild flowers of many types of different colors. The cries of different birds could also be heard in the distance. It was quite a mesmerizing scene of natural beauty, and the fire moon being involuntarily relaxed upon seeing this. However, his eyes only glazed over for a split second before he returned to his senses, and exclaimed, "This is an illusion." He hurriedly cast his gaze upward to find blue skies with a few white clouds overhead, and he discovered that there was no end in sight to the grasslands he was situated on. The spot where the fire moon being was standing was quite soft and lush, and the air around him was filled with the refreshing scent of nature. This illusion was completely flawless. He really did feel as if he were situated on a vast grassland. Break! The fire moon being let loose a loud cry as a grim expression appeared on his face. He then bit open the tip of his tongue while raising both of his hands up into the air at the same time, and the red blades of wind around him suddenly shot forth in all directions. A series of white rifts were sliced into thin air, and it was as if these sharp red blades were capable of slicing open space itself. In the face of the violent assault from these red blades of light, the surrounding scenes began to blur, following which the grasslands and the blue skies vanished. The fire moon being was quite elated to see this. It was rather surprising that such an extraordinary-looking illusionary technique had been broken so easily. However, a smile had only just appeared on his face when a piercing burst of green light erupted from his blurred surroundings. The fire moon being's eyes narrowed as red light immediately flashed from his body, and countless blades of light surfaced again to form a revolving protective barrier around him. The fire moon being then suddenly felt his surroundings dim slightly, and when he refocused his gaze up ahead, his expression darkened significantly. After the scenes around him had transformed, he suddenly found himself in a forest that was filled with massive trees several 100 feet tall. All of them stood tall and proud, and their lush canopies obscured virtually the entire sky. It was quite clear that he hadn't been able to escape from the illusion at all. The fire moon being naturally became quite enraged and unsettled upon seeing this. However, before he had a chance to do anything, the ground beneath his feet suddenly began to tremor and quake violently. Immediately thereafter, the surrounding trees all began to tip over toward a single direction as if they were frail toothpicks, and countless massive trees came crashing down toward him. The fire moon being's heart jolted with shock, and the sharp blades around his body immediately shot forth in all directions again. All of the falling trees that were shredded amid flashes of red light before they could strike their target. Yet just when the fire moon being was about to try and break the illusionary technique again, a series of dull thumps suddenly rang out. Many of his blades of light had struck a black shadow that was extremely resolute and stalwart. All of the red blades that struck the object disappeared in a flash, and the black shadow expanded to several times its original size before crashing down with devastating might. It was a black mountain that was over 1,000 feet tall. Arg! The fire moon being was caught completely off guard, and he only had time to raise his head and opened his mouth to expel a ball of red mist. There seemed to be something hidden with that ball of red mist. As soon as the red mist came into contact with the small mountain, red light flashed, and a crimson treasure that appeared to be a wooden board with countless runes flashing over its surface emerged. The wooden board was certainly quite a powerful treasure, but there was no way that it would be able to withstand the divine essence-effused mountain's insane weight and power. The small black mountain crushed the red light around the wooden board with ease, then continued to descend toward its target without any pause or delay. Crab! The fire moon being's expression changed drastically, but it was too late for him to do anything, and he was crushed under this immensely heavy black mountain. At the same time, the surrounding scenes warped before dissipating into specks of spiritual light. All of the illusions disappeared, and the fire moon being reappeared within the small valley that he'd been situated all along. However, he found himself hovering in midair as opposed to standing on a bed of lush grass, and the small black mountain was still plummeting straight down from above. In the next instant, an earth-shattering boom rang out, and a massive crater that was several tens of feet deep was smashed into the ground by the small black mountain. The fire moon being's body was instantly reduced to a pile of mincemeat within the crater. He was a spatial tempering stage being just like Hanley, but his physical body was unexpectedly feeble. As a spatial tempering stage being, the fire moon being naturally possessed more abilities than those he just revealed. Unfortunately, he made the wrong decision to use his avatar secret technique from the get-go. After his avatars were caught off guard and destroyed by the lightning bead, as well as the armor origin talisman, his body was dealt 2 heavy blows in quick succession, thereby forcing him firmly onto the back foot. After that, he'd fallen into the illusionary technique of Han Li's spring-dawn sword formation, and the divine essence-effused mountain had attacked him under the camouflage of all of the illusions around it, thereby easily destroying his physical body and leaving him with no chance to turn the tables. Letter 1D627, letter 1D4C7, letter 1D452, letter 1D452, letter 1D464, letter 212F, letter 1D624, letter 2134, letter 1D62E. Right at this moment, red light flashed from the fire moon being's remains beneath the black mountain, following which an egg-sized bead shot forth before disappearing into the soil down below in a flash. All of a sudden, a swath of gray light erupted from the underside of the small mountain, instantly sweeping up the red bead within the soil and completely immobilizing it. Immediately thereafter, gray light flashed, and the bead was hurled viciously out of the ground. At the same time, azure light flashed from the summit of the small mountain, and a humanoid figure appeared out of thin air before making a grabbing motion toward the bead. The bead was instantly drawn into the humanoid figure's grasp by an enormous suction force. The humanoid figure was none other than Han Li, and he looked down at the bead in his hand to find that it was of a fiery red color. The material of the bead was glittering and translucent, and there was a miniature humanoid figure that was around an inch in size inside the bead. The miniature humanoid figure was completely identical in appearance to the fire moon being, except a barely noticeable small horn had appeared on his forehead. You really are related to the Jiaokai race. I'm rather curious now. Are you a Jiaokai being or a fire moon being? Han Li asked with a cold smile on his face as he casually massaged the bead between 2 of his fingers. The miniature humanoid figure remained silent with its eyes tightly shut. Seeing as you were trying to obtain my jade box, you must know what's in them, right? If you can reveal to me the contents of the boxes, perhaps I can. You can allow my soul to escape from this place. The miniature humanoid figure suddenly cut off Han Li as it opened its eyes with an expressionless look on his face. I can't do that, but I can save you the pain of having your soul searched, Han Li replied in a cold manner. In that case, then I have nothing to say. If you plan to use a soul search technique on me, then I'd advise you to save your energy. A holy race being has already planted a restriction in my spiritual sense. Even if a being of the upper 3 tiers of the holy race were to try and search my soul, it would only cause my soul to self-detonate, the miniature humanoid figure said with a deriding sneer on its face. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, and he stared intently at the red bead for a while longer before suddenly rubbing his hands together. A loud thunderclap rang out, and golden arcs of lightning flashed as the bead and the miniature humanoid figure within it were both destroyed. Han Li didn't know if the fire moon being had been telling the truth, but he couldn't afford to waste any more time here. It was also possible that a tracking mark could have been planted into the fire moon being's soul, so he couldn't just keep it alive and take it with him for future interrogation. As such, he destroyed it without any hesitation, seeing as it was unwilling to provide him with the information he wanted. Unbeknownst to Han Li, in the instant that the fire moon being's soul was destroyed, a faint cry of surprise suddenly rang out from within a large silver palace atop the giant silver island hovering above Green Light City. "What is it, Brother Two?" another being asked with a curious look. "The restriction that I planted in Hong Yin's soul has disappeared. It appears that he's been killed," a silver-robed elderly man replied with furrowed brows as he sat in a white chair. There was a short crimson horn on his head, and he made a grabbing motion, following which an azure wooden badge appeared in his grasp. There was a red gem at the center of the wooden badge, but it had been shattered into several pieces. Could it be that someone blew his cover and he was killed by a swarm of cultivators? The other person mused. This was a middle-aged man who appeared to be in his 40s, and he was also wearing a set of silver robes. Perhaps so. After all, Hong Yin's cultivation base is nothing to be scoffed at, and according to the information he brought back last time, there are not beings of the 3 holy race tiers in Green Light City. Unless he was swarmed by many cultivators at once, he shouldn't be falling in a small city like that. Alternatively, perhaps another being of the holy race tiers has infiltrated the city prior to our arrival. If a being of that caliber were to appear in the city and insist on concealing themselves, then it's quite possible that our initial forces failed to notice their presence. The elderly man replied as he stroked his beard with a nod of his head. In that case, it looks like the 2 of us will have to make a trip in person. I really don't understand what treasures we're trying to obtain that would warrant deploying beings of our caliber. The middle-aged man sighed as if he found all of this to be quite a pain. Even if we're extremely close to becoming holy race beings, we're still incomparable to them. Our cultivation bases are equivalent to the first holy race tier, but more than 10 elders unleashed secret techniques to inject their power into our bodies before we were able to break through that bottleneck. We may possess the same amount of magic power as a being of the first holy race tier, but our spiritual sense and cultivation arts are significantly inferior. Without several thousand years of arduous cultivation, there's no way that we'd be able to compare with true holy race beings. If it weren't for the fact that we're short on people here, the elders most likely wouldn't have deployed us in such a hasty manner, the elderly man said with a shake of his head. That's true, but even so, if we combine our powers, we'd surely stand a chance against a being of the first or second holy race tier, and it's extremely unlikely that a being of that caliber would appear in Green Light City, the middle-aged man replied with a nod. It's a pity that we lost Hong Yin here. A wistful look appeared on the elderly man's face. I heard that he possessed both the bloodlines of our Jiao Kai race, as well as the Fire Moon race, and that the Jiao Kai race bloodline stems from your Fire faction. Could it be that he was somehow related to you, brother too? The middle-aged man asked with a smile. He was indeed a distant descendant of mine. I unintentionally discovered him, and I planted him as a spy within the heavenly cloud races. He possesses superb aptitude, and it's quite possible that he could reach our cultivation bases one day. Our Fire faction elders had already decided that, after he completes his spy duties in the heavenly cloud races, they were going to completely transform his body and convert it into that of a Jiao Kai being. Who would have thought that he would fall at the final hurdle? A dark expression appeared on the elderly man's face. There's no need to be sad, brother too. All we have to do is torture his killers to death in order to avenge him. It's a pity that we couldn't plant any tracking marks on his body, as that could lead to him being exposed. Otherwise, we could easily find the perpetrators. Even so, it's not a big deal. We've deployed most of our troops from this battle arc, so there's no way that they'll be able to get away from this place, the middle-aged man said with a smile. With the profound heaven-shifting disc given to us by the elders, we naturally don't have to worry about them getting away. The only issue is that there are more than one of those items, and we don't know if the myriad ancient race is in possession of them. We have to make sure to obtain those items, so we can't drive those beings too far into a corner, to the extent that they'll destroy those items. The elders explicitly stated that we have to take those items back to them in perfect condition, the elderly man sighed. I'm well aware of this. Otherwise, why would we be hiding here in this battle arc? We're trying to confirm our targets before taking those items without giving them any chance to react. Our original plan was to get Hong Yin to plant marks onto the beings who possess these items, then notify us so we can obtain the items. Now that Hong Yin has fallen, we don't know who's in possession of those items, so things have indeed become a little troublesome, the middle-aged man mused with furrowed brows. It's become a little more difficult, but it's nothing that we can't overcome. Those items are extremely important, so we can presume that they definitely wouldn't be entrusted to beings with lowly cultivation bases. After all, we've deployed so many troops with the sole purpose of capturing everyone and ensuring that none of the low-grade cultivators manage to escape. If those people really were stupid enough to entrust those items to low-grade cultivators, then our jobs would be made a lot simpler. As such, the scope of our search can be narrowed down quite significantly. I think that the items are most likely being carried by a being of the mid or upper tier of the upper race. Of course, if a holy race being has appeared in the city, then the items would undoubtedly be in their hands, the elderly man analyzed in a slow and methodical manner. That does indeed significantly minimize the scope of our search. We'll leave the mid-tier upper race beings to the winged worms, but we have to take down the beings of the 3 upper tiers in person, the middle-aged man agreed with a nod of his head. Keep 2 of the generals here in the battle arc and deploy the rest of them. Judging from how much time has elapsed, the vast majority of those low-grade beings should have been taken care of already. Without their interference, the profound heaven-shifting disc should be able to easily track down the approximate locations of those high-grade beings, the elderly man murmured. The middle-aged man didn't say anything in response, but a contemplative look had also appeared on his face. At this point, the giant falcons and silver-armored beings on the canoes were searching through the city, scouring for foreign beings. Most of them had been killed or captured, with only a small proportion of beings with advanced concealment techniques hiding nearby, hoping to be able to survive this ordeal. All of the beings of a higher caliber had already fled the city, and they were being pursued by the winged worms. As for whether they'd be chased down or not, that was something that only the heavens knew. However, the armored warriors and twin-headed falcons were merely searching through the nearby area, without displaying any intention lending their assistance to those worms, and that was a clear indication of just how fearsome these winged worms were. As the giant falcons and armored falcons scoured through the city over and over again, there would occasionally be a few streaks of light erupting from obscure hiding spots, only to be instantly slain by their pursuers. At this point, Han Li was already around 40 kilometers away from Grenlight City. The battle he'd waged against the Fire Moon being seemed to have been an extremely intense one that would have surely kicked up a massive commotion. But in reality, no spiritual chi fluctuations had managed to escape out of the Spring Dawn sword formation that he'd set up. Even the astonishing sound wave unleashed by that azure bell had been completely absorbed by the sword formation. Thus, even though their battle had taken place extremely close to Green Light City, none of the Jiao Kai beings had noticed anything amiss. As soon as Han Li had destroyed the Fire Moon being's soul, he'd secured the Jade box and the golden blood pill before burning his body into nothingness. After that, he stowed away his treasures in sword formation, then snuck away after using one of his high zenith invisibility talismans. With the concealment ability of his high zenith invisibility talisman, even beings of the same caliber as Han Li would find it extremely difficult to detect his presence, so the Jiao Kai beings that had been deployed to scour through the area were naturally unable to track him down. Thus, Han Li was able to fly right past a few twin-headed falcons and black canoes, and the Jiao Kai beings completely failed to notice him. As for the big-headed being and the green-skinned being, Han Li had no idea where they had fled to. However, they'd had to sacrifice some of their speed for stealth and discreetness, so they were most likely still within several hundred kilometers of Green Light City. Han Li continued onward as these thoughts flashed through his mind. As he did so, he was constantly surveying his surroundings and flying toward the places with the fewest pursuers from the Jiao Kai race. Shortly thereafter, Han Li was several hundred kilometers away from Green Light City, and there were no more enemies in sight. He heaved a faint sigh of relief upon making this observation, but he still didn't dare to deactivate his high zenith invisibility talisman. Who knew of if the Jiao Kai race had some kind of special secret technique or treasure that could detect his presence even from thousands of kilometers away? Unbeknownst to Han Li, the caution that he was exercising really was paying off. Just as he was flying further and further away from Green Light City, 6 black shadows were hovering in the air above the massive silver island. 2 of them were the elderly man and middle-aged man who were conversing in the palace earlier, and the other 4 also appeared to be important beings. At this moment, the 6 of them were hovering in a circular formation around golden disk treasure that was slowly rotating on the spot. At the center of the treasure was an arrow that was several inches in length, and it was extending and withdrawing in an erratic manner. There was a series of circles carved onto the disk for calibration purposes, and at the same time, golden runes were emerging from the disk before hovering in the air above it. The 6 beings stared intently as the golden disk, and after rotating a few times, the arrow suddenly shuddered before coming to an abrupt halt. The arrow also extended and shrank before settling between 2 of the calibration circles, following which it fell completely still. All right, we've tracked down the 4 most powerful beings. The 4 of you split up into groups of 2 and pursue 2 of those beings. Leave the other 2 to us. From the reaction being displayed by the disk, they should be beings of the upper 3 tiers of the upper race. When you find them, try not to attack right away if you can avoid it. After we take care of the other 2, we'll go and join you. Remember this, if they try to destroy something, stop them at all costs. The 4 of you can each take a pair of winged worms with you as well. We should have all of our bases covered then. The elderly man instructed in a cold voice as he withdrew his gaze from the golden disk. Yes, the 4 beings hurriedly replied in unison as they extended respectful bows. All right, seeing as we've finished assigning respective duties, let's get started right away. Even the closest one of our 4 targets is already several hundred kilometers away, so time is of the essence, the middle-aged man urged. The 4 beings nodded in unison, following which the elderly man suddenly let loose a long cry. Golden light abruptly flashed from the massive silver island, following which a dozen or so additional golden winged worms flew forth. After just a few flashes, they arrived in the air above the 6 people before circling around overhead. The elderly man waved a hand in an expressionless manner, and the 4 beings all shot forth as streaks of light. 8 of the winged worms followed the 4 of them away into the distance. The 2 winged worms that remained were silently awaiting further orders. At this moment, the elderly man turned back toward the golden disc, and a peculiar look appeared on his face. All of a sudden, he made a hand seal to cast a beam of red light that disappeared into the disc in a flash, following which the arrow began to rotate once again. After a short while, the arrow settled on a certain direction. It was none other than the direction that Han Li was escaping in. "What is it, Brother Two? Are you still concerned about the being in that direction?" the middle-aged man asked. "I am. The disc is reacting to that direction, but the intensity of the reaction is fluctuation drastically. At times, that being appears to be the most powerful of the lot, but at other times the disc barely reacts to them at all. It really is quite strange," the elderly man replied with an indecisive look on his face. "Looks like that being either possesses a treasure that can disrupt the profound heaven-shifting disc's detection, or they truly possess immense magic power, allowing them to unleash an ability that can disguise their cultivation base," the middle-aged man mused after a short pause. "Perhaps, if it's the former, then that would be fine, but if the latter prove to be true, then we can't afford to let them escape. I suggest we deploy 2 of the winged worms to investigate first. Once a verdict is reached, we can make our decision then," the elderly man proposed. "I also believe that to be the wisest decision. If everything goes smoothly, then this matter should be taken care of within half a day." The middle-aged man chuckled in response, clearly of the opinion that taking some things from a bunch of spatial tempering stage beings surely wouldn't be a difficult task. The elderly man nodded upon hearing this, and the let loose loud cry. The 2 golden-winged worms overhead immediately reacted and flew in the direction that the arrow on the disc was pointing in. Moments later, they had disappeared into the distance. The elderly man and the middle-aged man didn't delay any longer either, as they shot forth as streaks of light, traveling toward different directions. White light suddenly flashed from one of their bodies, and they slowly took on a transparent and virtually invisible form. As for the other streak of light, after it had flown through the air for close to 10 kilometers, a cloud of purple mist erupted to conceal the streak of light. After a while, the purple mist also vanished along with the streak of light within it. In the air above a small hill, a foreign being with sallow cheeks and a pair of feelers growing from his head was riding atop a gecko-like spirit beast, flying through the air at an altitude of several tens of feet. The gecko was only around 10 feet in length, and there was a faint layer of yellow light emanating from its body, allowing it to completely blend in with the soil down below. Under the disguise of this layer of yellow light, the foreign being and his gecko steed were extremely discreet, making it very difficult to detect their presence with the naked eye alone. The foreign being appeared to be quite uneasy as he flew along atop his spirit beast steed, glancing behind himself regularly to check if any pursuers had appeared on the horizon. This being was at the early spatial tempering stage, but he wasn't one of the beings who had fled the city with Han Li and big-headed being. It appeared that aside from those 4 beings, there were also other high-grade beings lurking within the city. This being had somehow escaped the detection of the big-headed being and refrained from coming into contact with all of the other high-grade beings. Furthermore, he had concealed his cultivation base this entire time and didn't want to be lumped together with the other spatial tempering stage beings, as that would undoubtedly make him one of the main targets of the Jiao Kai race. Even after the city gates were opened, he had fled alongside all of the low-grade beings, posing as one himself. At present, he was already close to 1,000 kilometers away from Green Light City, and this was already a safe distance away under most circumstances. However, the foreign still wore an uneasy look on his face. For some reason, he had been struck by a sense of foreboding not long ago, and this feeling had only intensified thereafter. He hailed from the Heart Charm race, which was only a small race on the Thunder continent, but they possessed a rare natural ability that allowed them to sense danger more acutely than other beings. As such, he didn't dare to disregard this sense of uneasiness in his heart, and was inspecting his surroundings in an extremely cautious manner. All of a sudden, his expression changed slightly, and he seemed to have detected something. He clamped his legs more tightly against the sides of his gecko steed, and the spirit beast immediately drew to a halt. At the same time, it also began to survey their surroundings with its large red eyes. All of a sudden, a burst of white light erupted beside the foreign being, following which a humanoid figure emerged in a flash. The humanoid figure raised a hand, and a streak of powerful sword chi flashed through the air. The golden sword chi was extremely dazzling to behold, and it reached the heart charm being in the flash. Heart charm being's heart jolted with shock. If it hadn't received forewarning from its instincts, then it would most likely have been caught completely off guard and slain by that attack. Thankfully, he was alert and ready, and a small black shield abruptly appeared before him amid a flash of black light. At the same time, a buzzing sound rang out from his body, and 3 barriers of light, respectively crimson, yellow, and green in color, appeared around him. The heart charm being's gecko steed also abruptly shook its body, and its remarkably long tail swept through the air as a black shadow. At the same time, it opened its mouth to blast forth a ball of putrid green liquid toward the humanoid figure within the white light. As expected of a spatial tempering stage being, the heart charm being was able to formulate a rapid sequence of defensive measures despite how abruptly it had been attacked. However, the golden sword chi unleashed by the humanoid figure was also quite devastatingly powerful, slicing through the black shield before crashing into the 3 light barriers. The small black shield was sliced in half and plummeted down from above, as a hint of shock appeared in the heart charm being's eyes. The golden struck chi then struck the 3-colored light barrier amid a piercing flash of light, following which the 4 colors intertwined and clashed amid a string of incessant explosions. The 3-colored light barrier had managed to keep the attack at bay. The ball of green liquid and the gecko's powerful tail also struck the white humanoid figures at the same time, but the humanoid figure merely swayed slightly, and the attacks passed through his body as if it were a mere illusion. What kind of ability is this? The heart charm being's heart jolted with shock as he stared intently at his opponent. At the same time, he quickly flipped over a hand, and spiritual light flashed from his palm as a silver talisman appeared. He then flicked his wrist as if he were about to hurl the talisman through the air, but right at this moment, a gentle breeze suddenly blew past in the air behind him, following which a barely visible humanoid figure appeared, seemingly out of thin air. The humanoid figure was semi-transparent and emerged in a wraith-like manner, without triggering any spiritual fluctuations. As such, the heart charm being was completely oblivious to the fact that a second enemy had appeared behind him, and he abruptly raised his hand into the air. The talisman that he was holding instantly transformed into countless arcs of silver lightning that were sent hurtling toward the enemy up ahead. Loud thunderclaps erupted and silver lightning exploded before inundating the white humanoid figure. As soon as the silver lightning was unleashed, a scorching aura filled the entire nearby space, creating quite a formidable attack. Meanwhile, a sinister smile appeared on the face of the semi-transparent humanoid figure behind the heart charm being, following which he flew through the air as a streak of green light. An incredible scene ensued. The 3-colored light barrier that was powerful enough to withstand the attack from the golden sword, chi, proved to be completely ineffective in the face of the streak of green light. The green light punctured the light barrier in flash before disappearing into the heart charm being's body, completely disregarding the defensive measures set up. A blood-curdling cry immediately rang out as the heart charm being instantly rose up into the air before desperately attempting to flee the scene. However, he only managed to fly for just over 100 feet before his body spasmed violently, and he plumbed directly downward. All of his flesh and blood were quickly withering away at a rate that was discernible to the naked eye, and even before he had landed on the ground, he had been reduced to an empty husk. Even the heart charm being's soul had been completely destroyed during this process. Without anyone to control it, the silver lightning in the air above instantly disappeared, thereby revealing the white humanoid figure again. Golden light flashed in his hand, and the giant gecko beast was instantly dismembered into several chunks. Hee. A smug chuckle escaped from within the wizened husk of the heart charm being's body, and it suddenly began to expand again, reverting back to its original form in the blink of an eye, as if the heart charm being had returned to life. The heart charm being inspected his 2 hands as an unsettling smile appeared on his face. He then turned and waved a hand toward the humanoid figure within the white light. The humanoid figure immediately approached him, and the white light around his body faded to reveal his true features. It was none other than that middle-aged Jiaokai being. However, his expression was completely wooden and lifeless, as if he'd been reduced to a puppet. This blood-melting technique really is quite powerful. It's a pity that I can't use it in quick succession. Otherwise, it would truly be an extremely useful offensive technique. The heart charm being mused in a rather forlorn manner as he appraised the middle-aged man before him. After that, he flicked his wrist, and a storage bracelet shot forth, revolving around in the air before all of its contents were tipped out. The heart charm being swept his spiritual sense toward this collection of items before making a grabbing motion, upon which several boxes flew toward him. He opened the boxes one by one and carefully inspected their contents, but his expression quickly darkened. There were some rather precious items in this collection, but none of them were the items that he was looking for. He pointed a finger at the storage bracelet, and a swath of azure light swept forth before stowing all of the items back into the bracelet. A contemplative look then appeared on the heart charm being's face, and a thought suddenly seemed to have occurred to him as he hurriedly patted himself down in an unfamiliar manner. However, his search only yielded 2 talismans and a few other inconsequential items. The heart charm being harumphed coldly before shaking his head in a resigned manner. He then made a hand seal, and a streak of green light flew out from the top of his head before transforming into that semi-transparent humanoid figure again. Meanwhile, the heart charm being sagged like a balloon before crumpling down onto the ground as an empty husk again. The semi-transparent being disappeared into the middle-aged man's body, and the man shuddered before closing his eyes as a layer of green light surfaced over his body. After a long while, the middle-aged man heaved a long sigh before opening his eyes again. His wooden and lusterless eyes had come alive again, and a soul seemed to have been injected back into his body. While the middle-aged man was making short work of the heart charm being, the green-skinned being was whizzing through the air elsewhere as a transparent blur. Unless a holy race being were present, no one would be able to detect his presence. As such, the dark green being was feeling relatively relaxed compared to everyone else after parting with the other spatial tempering stage beings, and he was wondering what was in the jade box that had been given to him. According to the big-headed being, there was a good chance that he'd be able to exchange the item in the box for a myriad wonder pill that he had been yearning for a long time. Did that mean that the box contained something even more valuable? Due to the fact that it was considering these matters, it failed to notice a faint purple shadow pursuing it soundlessly down below. A pair of cold, unblinking eyes lurked within the purple shadow, observing his every move. After a short while, the purple shadow seemed to have gathered all of the visual data it required, and it suddenly shot forth as a purple thread, reaching the spot directly beneath the green-skinned being. The green-skinned being was leaping through the forest, and the purple thread had timed its move so that it coincided with the instant when the green-skinned being landed next. An earth-shattering boom abruptly rang out from the ground below, following which a pair of large hands that were shimmering with crimson light locked around the green-skinned being's ankles in a flash. The dark green being was naturally given a massive fright, but he reacted quite quickly as spiritual light flashed from his body, and he abruptly twisted around as he attempted to escape. However, the pair of hands around his ankles had caught them in a vice-like grip and absolutely refused to let him go. A burst of excruciating pain speared up his legs, and he was unable to move even in the slightest. His expression finally changed drastically as he realized the dire nature of his situation, and he immediately opened his mouth to blast forth a burst of white light that struck the wrists connected to those hands in a flash. A loud metallic clang rang out, and the white light receded as a small sword that was several inches in length was repelled away, leaving not even so much as a single scratch on its target. The green-skinned being drew a sharp breath as he hurriedly made a hand seal to try and unleash some other kind of powerful ability, but it was already too late. Following a cold harumph, a burst of red light erupted from the pair of large hands, instantly enshrouding the green-skinned being's entire body. The red light was scorching hot, even melting the nearby soil into a pool of lava. A blood-curdling cry instantly rang out, and protective spiritual light flashed around the dark green being in a desperate effort to keep him alive, but his body quickly burst into flames. Meanwhile, close to another forest elsewhere, 2 Jiaokai race spatial tempering stage being were discussing something in quiet voices as they hovered in midair. 4 winged worms had gone on ahead, circling through the air in a methodical manner as if they were searching for something. That being sure is alert. As soon as we approach this place, their aura disappeared. Even the winged worms can't locate them now. This is going to be a little troublesome. An urgent look appeared on the faces of one of the Jiao Kai beings. Don't worry, that being is of the same cultivation base as you and me. For them to be able to completely conceal their aura like this indicates that they can't possibly be moving, so they must be hiding nearby. In that case, we'll just have to play a waiting game. Once our 2 masters get here, they'll have nowhere to hide. The other Jiao being responded with a calm smile. I guess that's the only way to proceed. The first being could only give a reluctant nod. Meanwhile, the big-headed being was situated within a nondescript tree in the forest. His brows were rightly furrowed, and he was enveloped in a strange gray cloak that had completely concealed his aura. Elsewhere, there was a streak of light flying over a set of mountain ranges. Within the streak of light was a scaled foreign being with the head of a crocodile forging ahead as quickly as he could. Several kilometers behind him, there were two Jiao Kai race spatial tempering stage beings flying through the air in a flying carriage that was several tens of feet in size, trailing along in a completely stealthy and discreet manner. Even further behind the carriage were four winged worms, all of which were also flying along in a stealthy manner in order to prevent their target from detecting their presence. All of the spatial tempering stage beings that had fled from Green Light City were being hunted down by high-grade Jiao Kai beings, and Han Li was no exception. At this moment, he was hovering high up in the air, looking down below with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Two winged worms were currently circling through the air several hundred feet below him. It was the first time that he'd seen such strange worms, and they'd only arrived here not long ago. They seemed to be adamant that Han Li was in this general vicinity, so they were scouring carefully through the area, but Han Li was still concealed by his high zenith invisibility talisman, so the two worms were naturally unable to locate him. As such, they could only scurry around like headless chickens. Han Li stroked his chin as he assessed his surroundings, but failed to notice any other Jiao Kai race pursuers nearby. Thus, a cold look appeared on his face as he contemplated whether he should kill these two pesky creatures. The two winged worms were only deity transformation stage beings, so they'd be no match for him. However, he was still less than 1,000 kilometers away from Green Light City at present, and if there really were body integration stage beings conducting surveillance toward this direction with their spiritual sense, then killing these two beasts could expose his location. After considering the issue for a while, Han Li still shook his head and rid himself of that thought in the end. Thus he drifted away, planning to leave the pair of winged worms alone. However, an unexpected turn of events then unfolded. After flying out for just over 100 feet, purple light suddenly flashed from his body, following which he abruptly lost his invisibility. The high zenith invisibility talisman just so happened to run out of power at this moment, and this unexpected development came as quite a surprise to Han Li. In the instant that his body was revealed, both of the winged worms immediately looked up and caught sight of him. The two beasts instantly let loose a collective cry of elation before flapping their wings and hurtling directly toward Han Li. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D4 2B, letter 1D5 56, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D6 04, letter 1D6 AT. Letter 1D5 54, letter 1D5 60, letter 1D4 6. Han Li's expression darkened upon seeing this, and he made a hand seal as a loud thunderclap erupted behind him, following which a pair of glittering and translucent wings appeared on his back. He looked down at the oncoming winged worms and let loose a cold harumph. The harumph wasn't particularly loud, but to the winged worms, they felt as if a thunderclap had erupted right inside their ear cavities. Both of them were immediately struck by a splitting headache, and they let loose howls of agony in unison before plummeting straight downward. At this moment, Han Li flapped his wings and instantly disappeared as an arc of azure lightning. In the next instant, spatial fluctuations erupted beneath one of the winged worms, and Han Li abruptly reappeared. He swiped a hand through the air toward this winged worm, and a streak of azure sword chi shot forth before revolving around the worm's body, instantly slicing it in half. Even its soul had been completely destroyed in the process. Han Li then twisted around and disappeared once again as an azure thread. In the next instant, spatial fluctuations erupted beside the other winged worm, following which Han Li revealed himself again. He pressed a pristine white palm gently onto the winged worm's body, and a burst of 5-colored flames fanned out in a ferocious torrent, instantly freezing it into a chunk of 5-colored ice. Immediately thereafter, golden light flashed from his 5 fingers, and several arcs of golden lightning struck the block of ice in unison. The winged worm was completely pulverized along with the block of ice as a result, but a ball of green light attempted to escape from the worm's shattered remains, only to also be destroyed by a bolt of golden lightning. Thus, Han Li had slain the 2 winged worms in virtually the blink of an eye. However, he didn't have time to stand around and appreciate his own handiwork. Instead, He immediately flew into the distance as a streak of azure light, making no further attempt to conceal himself. If there were no body integration stage beings among his pursuers, then no one would be able to catch up to him. If there were such beings among their ranks, then he'd most likely drawn their attention already, so the high zenith invisibility talisman wouldn't do him any good. As such, it was best to focus on speed rather than stealth. In the instant that the two winged worms were felled, the middle-aged man and the elderly man from the Jiao Kai being both looked from their respective locations, casting their gaze toward Han Li's direction in unison. There was a pile of random stuff strewn all over the ground before the elderly man's feet, and a jade box in his hand. His eyes narrowed slightly as a contemplative look appeared on his face. However, moments later, he abruptly swept a sleeve through the air, and the pile of items at his feet disappeared amid a flash of light along with the jade box in his hand. After that, he rose into the air and flew toward Han Li's direction as a streak of red light. Meanwhile, due to the fact that the middle-aged man had slain his target quite early, he was already flying toward another direction. He was still rather hesitant about whether he should turn around and pursue Han Li instead, but he shook his head in the end and continued along his original route. However, he was suddenly flying significantly faster than before. He was already quite close to the other target, so he naturally wasn't going to turn around to hunt down Han Li instead. He was planning to take care of the nearby target first before turning around to pursue Han Li. Thus, only one of the two most powerful Jiao Kai beings had set off in pursuit of Han Li. Flying with all their might, the speed of beings of this caliber was truly incredible. Only around 7 to 8 minutes after Han Li had slain the winged worms and fled the scene, his expression suddenly changed slightly as he shot a glance behind him. There in the distance, a streak of red light was hurtling directly toward him. The streak of red light was able to cover over 1,000 feet in just a single flash, and it was flying around twice as fast as Han Li was. Blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes, allowing him to spot a humanoid figure within the red light. He then swept his spiritual sense toward his pursuer, and his heart sank ever so slightly. It really was a body integration stage being. Thankfully, he only appeared to be at the early body integration stage. Even if he couldn't win this battle, escaping would definitely be no issue for him. With that in mind, Han Li reverted back to his usual calm expression again. However, Han Li had no intention of battling an early body integration cultivator under these circumstances. He flapped his wings without any hesitation, and spiritual light flashed from his body as he shot forth through the air as an azure thread, accelerating to close to twice his original speed, thereby allowing him to match the speed of the streak of red light. In just the span of a few breaths, the two of them had disappeared into the distance. The humanoid figure within the streak of red light was naturally none other than the elderly man from the Jiao Kai race. Using the profound heaven-shifting disc, he was able to track down Han Li's location, but before he could get close to Han Li, the latter suddenly accelerated and fled at an alarming speed. Letter 1D65B, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D486, letter 1D486, letter 1D498, letter 1D65A. Letter 1D658, letter 1D664, letter 1D662. The elderly man's heart jolted with shock upon seeing this, but his astonishment was then quickly replaced by elation. It appeared that the being that he was pursuing was quite powerful, so it was quite likely that he was carrying one of the items he was seeking. Thus, the elderly man was even more determined to hunt Han Li down. The two of them hurtled through the air like a pair of shooting stars, making no efforts to conceal themselves, and it only took them a short while to cover a distance of hundreds of kilometers. During this time, the streak of red light was still unable to chase down the azure thread, and the elderly man was truly becoming rather surprised. Even though he wasn't proficient in movement techniques, his spiritual sense had clearly just revealed to him that his target was only a 7th-tier upper race being. As such, it was quite incredible that he'd managed to avoid being chased down over such a vast distance. However, the elderly man was a fearsome body integration stage being after all, so he naturally possessed a vast wealth of battle experience. As such, he abruptly stopped cold in his tracks before flipping a hand over expressionlessly to summon a purple talisman. He waved the talisman gently through the air, and a cloud of purple mist erupted, instantly permeating through an area with a radius of over 100 feet and completely concealing his body within. And Li had been keeping an eye on his pursuer this entire time, and his brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. He also immediately stopped mid-flight before casting his gaze behind him with narrowed eyes. He was rather curious about just what his opponent was plotting. The purple cloud of mist tumbled and surged before suddenly vanishing, and the elderly man within it also disappeared without a trace. Han Li's expression changed slightly, and he instantly released his spiritual sense to encompass an area with a radius of several tens of feet. However, the elderly man was still nowhere to be found, as if he'd truly completely disappeared. A grim expression appeared on Han Li's face, and he made a hand seal as blue light flashed through his eyes, activating his Brightsight Spirit Eyes ability. However, even with his Spirit Eye ability, he was still unable to track down the elderly man. Han Li's heart truly sank this time. Body integration stage beings were extremely fearsome opponents, so losing sight of one in battle could prove to be lethal. With that in mind, Han Li immediately fled into the distance as an azure thread. He didn't know where his opponent was lurking, but staying in this place for too long would naturally be extremely dangerous for him. However, if his opponent gave chase, then Han Li was confident that he'd be forced to reveal himself. Thus, the azure thread hurtled through the air, covering a distance of over 1,000 feet in just a single flash, and rapidly disappeared into the distance. As Han Li flew through the air, he continued to cast his gaze behind him while maintaining his Spirit Eye ability. Moments later, he finally discovered something, and he raised an eyebrow in response to this discovery. Extremely deep within the ground several kilometers behind him, there was a purple humanoid figure traveling through the soil without any impediment. It was none other than the elderly man from the Jiao Kai race. He had unleashed some kind of ability that had allowed him to instantly burrow several hundred feet deep into the ground, and Han Li failed to notice him initially due to a split second of complacency. However, for the elderly man to remain so blurry and indistinct even in the face of Han Li's Brightsight Spirit Eyes indicated that he was using quite an extraordinary concealment technique. Furthermore, not only had the elderly man managed to conceal himself underground, he was traveling even quicker through the soil than he was when flying in the air. Not only did the soil not impede him in the slightest, there were specks of yellow light constantly flying out from within the soil before injecting themselves into his body to further enhance his speed. Even though Han Li was already flying as quickly as he could, the elderly man was still slowly gaining on him. Han Li was rather surprised by this discovery, but he showed no sign of stopping or slowing down. Meanwhile, the elderly man that was surging through the soil was growing rather frustrated. He had thought that his disappearance would strike panic into Han Li's heart, and even if he decided to flee the scene, he would gradually decelerate or even temporarily stop. However, Han Li had fled without any hesitation, and even after flying for so long, he still didn't slow down even in the slightest. That was quite surprising to the elderly man. He was very confident in his concealment abilities, so in his mind, there was no way that a being with a cultivation base far inferior to his would be able to see through him with their spiritual sense. The only exception would be if said being possessed some kind of Spirit Eye ability, but the probability of that was so low that it was virtually negligible. Seeing as Han Li hadn't fallen for his ploy, the elderly man could only continue to give chase using his earth movement technique. However, he could naturally also see that he was traveling slightly faster than Han Li using this movement technique, so he naturally wasn't going to give up in his chase. Thus, the two of them traveled for thousands of kilometers without pause. Han Li could see the purple humanoid figure drawing closer and closer to him underground, and his expression gradually darkened as he began to inspect his surroundings. All of a sudden, a pair of tall mountains positioned alongside one another appeared up ahead. Both of the mountains were quite lush and steep, and there was a dense forest in between the two of them. Han Li's heart stirred upon seeing this before he cast a glance downward, with blue light flashing through his eyes. At this point, the purple figure was only just over 1,000 feet away from him, and was on the cusp of chasing him down. Thus, Han Li took a deep breath before suddenly changing direction and flying toward that forest. The azure thread flashed through the air before plunging into the forest, following which Han Li reappeared. Immediately thereafter, he rustled a sleeve, and several tens of small swords shot forth from within. He made a hand seal, and all of the small swords plunged into the ground as azure threads. Countless azure threads then flashed through the air, and the surrounding trees were all felled in an instant. Thus, an area with a radius of several thousand feet had opened up in the blink of an eye. After doing all that, Han Li swayed before appearing atop a tree stump that was several tens of feet tall, then pointed a finger up ahead in an expressionless manner. Immediately thereafter, the azure light faded, and all of the azure threads concealed themselves into empty space. Han Li then made a hand seal, and a loud thunderclap rang out as countless thin arcs of golden lightning erupted from his body, forming a golden and silver lightning robe. Following a surge of black chi, a suit of black baleful armor also appeared beneath his robes. After doing all that, Han Li opened his mouth to produce a small translucent shield, which began to rapidly rotate around him. Having made all of his preparations, Han Li simply clasped his hands behind his back and looked up into the sky in a completely stationary manner. In the soil deep beneath Han Li, the elderly man was appraising Han Li's every move with a vicious look in his eyes. He had finally chased down Han Li, but instead of pouncing right away, he wasn't in a hurry to strike. However, the elderly man didn't have much patience for an opponent with such a significantly inferior cultivation base, either. He swept his spiritual sense through the surrounding area to confirm that there were no other beings or traps nearby, following which a sinister look appeared on his face, and he abruptly disappeared from within the soil. In the next instant, an earth-shattering boom erupted, and the tree stump that Han Li was standing on exploded as a pair of massive crimson hands shot forth from the soil down below in an attempt to grab at his legs. However, Han Li seemed to have already anticipated this attack, and his body blurred without any premonition before he abruptly appeared over 100 feet away in a flash. A cold harumph rang out, and Han Li had only just reappeared when red light flashed before him, and the elderly man also revealed himself. A ferocious light flashed through his eyes as he raised both arms up into the air in unison. Two crimson fist projections instantly appeared before hurtling toward Han Li, sending a scorching heat wave surging toward him. This high-grade Jiaokai being was also a simultaneous cultivator. A hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes as he reached out with an inky black hand, pressing downward from above. A small black shadow flew forth from his palm in a flash, then transformed into a small mountain that was several tens of feet tall before descending in a soundless manner, heading directly toward the red fist projections. The elderly man's lips twitched upon seeing this, and instead of changing his attack, a derisive sneer appeared on his face. He was fully aware of just how powerful those fist projections were, and that was something that Han Li would only come to realize in the instant before his death. With that in mind, the elderly man activated his cultivation arts to an even greater extent, and the pair of fist projections instantly swelled to around twice their original size, making them comparable in size to human heads. Furthermore, the crimson light emanating from the surface of the fist projections also became extremely bright, illuminating the nearby air in a piercing red hue, and the scorching temperatures radiating from them was making the surrounding air completely twist and warp. He was planning to use this pair of fist projections to shatter the divine essence-effused mountain. A peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. Right at this moment, the fist projection and the underside of the small black mountain clashed in a completely soundless manner. The projections and the mountain tremored in unison before becoming completely motionless, as if they'd been captured in a stationary snapshot in time. However, a halo of gray and red light then appeared between the two before proliferating outward in all directions at an alarming rate. Han Li felt his eardrums tremor as a doomsday-like burst of rumbling rang out. The tree stumps down below were all instantly reduced to sawdust upon making contact with this halo of light, and the earth tremored violently as a huge crater with a radius of several hundred feet and a depth of around 10 feet was blasted into the ground. Han Li's heart jolted with shock as he hurriedly cast his gaze downward with blue light flashing through his eyes. There, the divine essence-effused mountain remained completely motionless, but the pair of fist projections beneath it had been eradicated. A pair of mundane-looking human hands were currently resisting the small mountain with all their might, preventing it from crashing directly downward. The owner of that pair of hands was none other than the elderly man. At this moment, his arms were slightly bent, and his face was flushed in an unhealthy manner, but he truly had managed to keep the divine essence-effused mountain at bay with just his hands and his immense strength.